The opening round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place at the spiritual season opener of the IndyCar season for years, St. Petersburg, Florida. This would be the first ever race on the track, but certainly not the first in the area. From 1985 to 1990, there's another street circuit in the vicinity of the present-day track, and after a 13-year absence, race cars returned to the streets of St. Pete. Rookie Sebastian Bourdais, off the back of a championship in International F3000, one of the predecessors to today's modern Formula 2 championship, would sit on the pole position, sharing the front row with Paul Tracy. Your last place starter would be Rodolfo Levin, setting a qualifying time over 5.5 seconds slower than pole sitter Bourdais. A frankly depressing 19 cars were on track for the season opener, a far cry from nearly 30 drivers 2 years prior. But regardless, the field was set to kick off a new season, a new event, and a new era in IndyCar history. As the cars fired up, there was trouble for Jimmy Vasser, whose engine vapor locked. With the issues he had, he was forced to start the race in last. The green flag came out and it was Sebastian Bourdais holding off a challenge from Tracy. By the end of the lap, the top three runners were Bourdais, Tracy, and Adrian Fernandez. But the viewers' attention soon shifted to a Brazilian pincer movement between championship favorite Bruno Junqueira and rookie Mario Haberfeld. Haberfeld would be given a justified warning for the frankly asinine block going down the front straightaway. Only 3 laps into the race, the first caution of the race came out when Alex Tagliani overshot turn 10 and sent himself into the tire barrier. Tagliani would be out of the race. After Speed Channel missed the ensuing restart, the order remained pretty much the same towards the front, with Bourdais still in the lead. About 5 laps later, another incident happened, yet again in turn 10. This time it was Rodolfo Levin, who spun and stalled in 10 after a botched move on Walter Salas. After Patrick Lemery spun on the next restart and brought out another yellow, the first series of pit stops began. Bourdais would stay out, while mostly everyone else came in. This pit cycle would be disastrous for Bruno Junqueira, who had an extra long stop after the air hose came out of the gun for the right rear tire changer. Bourdais was yet again the top runner on the next restart, and would stay ahead of Adrian Fernandez for the time being. Tracy, meanwhile, was stuck behind Thiago Montero. There was also trouble for Roberto Gonzalez, who picked up a speeding penalty from the pit cycle and later retired from the race. Despite staying out on track and being on very old tires, Sebastian Bourdais was still the only driver in the field lapping in the 102 area. Bourdais had to pit eventually, and he did on lap 30, giving the lead to Thiago Montero. Bourdais was also chewed up by the Forsyth teammates of Tracy and Carpentier. Things only got worse for Bourdais, as about 4 laps after the pit stop, Bourdais made contact with Adrian Fernandez exiting turn 10. The contact broke Bourdais' rear suspension, and while he would rejoin the race later on, he was taken out of contention. The following part of the race was really boring. So much in fact that while writing this video, I was looking for some form of entertainment, even at my own expense. So I'm watching the 2003 Champ Car race at St. Pete. That's really f***ing boring right now, so I decided to give myself some entertainment by whacking myself with a taser. The lull in the race came to an end on lap 48, when the 4th full course yellow came out after Patrick Carpentier hit the wall in turn 8. After the second restart on the day that Speed Channel missed, the drivers got back rolling a little short of the halfway mark, with Tracy still in the lead, Michel Jourdain Jr. in second, and Bruno Junqueira in third. This green flag stint was much shorter than last, as a hard crash for Ryan Hunter-Reay in turn 10 brought out the 5th full course yellow. This was the longest yellow of the race, at 6 laps. When you start to mention the yellow flag laps like a competition, it's a pretty big indictment of the racing action. With 38 laps to go, the race got underway again, and this was a bad restart for Adrian Fernandez, who got spun by Mario Dominguez in turn 8. Fernandez would call it a day after this, parking it in the pits, hopping out of the car, and blasting Dominguez in his interview. It capped off a pretty miserable first race of the year for Adrian Fernandez. The final round of pit stops came and went, with the only big changes being Darren Manning losing a lot of time with a stall in the pits. Besides another frankly jackass maneuver from Mario Haberfeld, the final 38 laps were nauseatingly boring. After 105 laps in total, and 70 spent in the lead of the race, Paul Tracy would score the win at the 2003 Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. Michel Jourdain Jr. would finish in second, and Bruno Junqueira would finish third. Yeah, this race was pretty painful to sit through, and not just because I teased myself before the halfway mark. Note how in the comments section of this race, basically nobody mentioned the racing itself, mainly because there's just nothing to talk about. The fact I managed to get a 1,000-word script out of a race like this is truly unbelievable. Hopefully the rest of the season is far more interesting than this, because good lord that was boring. I mean, you know it's bad when tasing yourself is the only way of keeping yourself awake. Hopefully this boring race didn't leave a bad taste in your mouth, and I hope to see you next Wednesday for the Monterrey race review. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The second round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place south of the border, as the Champ Cars headed to Fundadora Park in Monterrey, Mexico. In the month-long break between St. Pete and Monterrey, there was already a driver swap. Roberto Gonzalez, driver of the number 11 Dale Coyne car at St. Pete, had now been replaced by former F1 driver Alex Yoong. Get used to some driver swaps at Coyne. It'll be a running joke throughout the series. Thanks to the total bore fest that St. Pete was, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about besides this driver swap and the start of the Iraq War 3 days before this race. And there goes the comment section on this video. For the second race in a row, Sebastian Bourdais would grab the pole position, setting the track record in the process. Thanks to the convoluted way that qualifying worked at the time, Paul Tracy would start second despite having a fastest time 1.8 seconds slower than Alex Tagliani in third. Joel Mathias would be our last place starter. Throughout the weekend, some storylines developed, such as the fact that 9 chassis have been damaged through practice and qualifying thanks to the curbs, with 6 of them being damaged beyond repair. Other storylines throughout the weekend include the absence of Patrick Carpentier on Saturday. He had gotten sick during the weekend and skipped out on Saturday running to focus on race day. Besides a blip for Alex Yoong, who had to pit during the formation laps to redo his seatbelts, there's not too much else to talk about, so let's get into the race itself. It was a good start for Sebastian Bourdais, who got the leg up on Tracy and held the lead going into turn 1. Farther towards the back, there are some cars that turned into million-dollar lawnmowers, but so far so clean. Although the front 2 runners were in the same order that they had been for most of St. Pete, things were a little different. Even though Tracy was in the dirty air, he was still keeping the Frenchman in striking distance. But before Tracy could pounce, the first full course yellow came out after Tiago Monteiro and the Fittipaldi Dingman car ground to a halt around turn 11. He was suffering from a series of gearbox issues, and those issues had finally caught up to him. The yellow would come out to retrieve the broken car. Before the yellow came out, a few drivers had already pitted, these being Patrick Carpentier, Jimmy Vasser, and Roberto Moreno. With a later pit stop during the caution, they would be able to make the rest of the race on only 2 stops. The restart came on lap 8, with the top 3 being Sebastian Bourdais, Paul Tracy, and Alex Tagliani. As the race went into the double digits, tires became a big talking point. Graining and wear were a big issue, so the next round of pit stops looming, teams were considering changing their tire pressures. On lap 14, another yellow came out after Patrick Lemarié stopped on the start-finish line. With this came most of the field's first stops, with the one big exception being leader Bourdais. It wasn't their own decision either. Bourdais was called into the pits, but thanks to radio issues, he stayed out. Oriol Servia, meanwhile, just stayed out for some inexplicable reason. On the ensuing restart, the last thing Bourdais or Servia wanted was another yellow. Thanks to a spin install for Rodolfo Levin, the yellow flag came out shortly after the restart, forcing those 2 down pit lane. This was already a pretty bad thing, but after a stall leaving the box, it was a complete disaster for your pole sitter Bourdais. On lap 20, the race was restarted, and besides Oriol Servia attempting a Spanish Inquisition on Joel Mathias, not a lot was going on. By lap 34, Tracy was in the lead by over 17 seconds, but the attention shifted to Oriol Servia, who damaged his suspension after a clumsy move on Alex Yoong. These 2 had yet another eventful moment only a few laps later, as after Servia crashed and brought the yellow out, Yoong spun entering pit road. The ensuing series of pit stops was just total chaos, as Paul Tracy stalled, Sebastian Bourdais broke his suspension under yellow, and Ryan Hunter-Reay was stuck on pit road for about 1,000 years after a series of stalls. On lap 45, the race was restarted with Paul Tracy in the lead, Michel Jourdain in second, and Bruno Junqueira in third. Well, that was until Junqueira lost it going into turn 5, giving Alex Tagliani the last podium spot. Quite a few laps later, there's another moment involving Junqueira, this time with his old friend from St. Pete, Mario Haberfeld. Keep an eye on these 2 dingleberries. By the end of this series, their rivalry will probably warrant its own video. Unlike last week when I decided to keep myself awake during a lull in the race by whacking myself with an actual stun gun, I kept things simple this time by just occasionally lightly smacking myself in the face. After the final round of pit stops went fairly smoothly, things went goofy again. Firstly was Mario Dominguez sending himself into low Earth orbit with help from an unsuspecting Darren Manning, shortly followed by Mario Haberfeld's rear suspension giving up. With 7 laps left, Patrick Carpentier went for the dive of a lifetime, which ended in a lawn mowing escapade, spin, stall, and a very late race yellow. Even though the move didn't work out, the fact he put together a race like he did, even when being sick as a dog, is pretty damn impressive. The race was set to finish with a shootout, and Paul Tracy had one blessing on his end. Ryan Hunter-Reay was between him and Michel Jourdain Jr. in P2. With 4 laps to go, the green was back out and the chase was on. Well, it was between Junqueira and Adrian Fernandez for P4. Tracy, meanwhile, had just driven off into the distance. Besides a crash for Jimmy Vasser that ended his day a few laps short, the final 4 laps were surprisingly uneventful. Paul Tracy would grab his second win in a row, with Michel Jourdain Jr. in second, and Alex Tagliani in a fantastic third. A deserved shout-out goes to the final 3 drivers in the top 10 of Patrick Carpentier, Alex Yoong, and Patrick Lemarié, who all had very good drives in their own regard. This This race was a step in the right direction, with way more to talk about than St. Pete. The race definitely had its dull points, but it's still not a bad race all round. Unlike St. Pete, where the race drained me so bad that I felt like I needed to take a nap afterward, this race left me with enough energy that I was able to record this voiceover right after writing this video. Hopefully we can see even more action at the next race of the year. Speaking of which, I hope you can all join me in 1 week's time for the Long Beach review. Thank you for watching, and have a great afternoon. The biggest race of the Champ Car season came early this year, as the third round of the 2003 Champ Car season was at Long Beach. The biggest topic coming into the race was the continuing dominance of Paul Tracy, who after grabbing back-to-back wins to start the year off, was on the prowl for a third. But for the third race in a row, Tracy would miss out on the pole, as it was the young Michel Jourdain Jr. grabbing the pole position for the race. Tracy would join him on the front row. It was a comparatively disappointing qualifying session for Sébastien Bourdais, who after grabbing 2 pole positions would qualify for Long Beach in a comparatively upsetting 5th. Alex Yoong would be your 19th and last place starter, completing a truly abysmal qualifying performance for the Dale Coyne team, as teammate Joel Mathias wasn't much better, starting in 18th. With some heavy cloud cover in Long Beach, there's a bit of an ominous vibe before the start of the race, but with no issues during the formation laps, it's time to get things underway. The green flag came out, and with a very unorganized start, it was Paul Tracy getting the jump on Michel Jourdain Jr. and taking the lead very early on. The start was somewhat controversial, and there's a bit of debate going on in the booth as to whether it was a smart call to wave the green flag. Debates out of the way, it was a surprisingly clean start, with no drivers in the wall or running into each other. The race was honestly really boring in this stage, with the order remaining practically identical all throughout the field. It's at times like these where I really wonder why I chose this season. I could have gone with the 2003 IRL season, but I chose this instead. Am I a masochist? I don't think so. Did I pick this season just because of the weirdness of it all? Maybe. Am I having an existential crisis right now? What is the meaning of hey, the pit stops are here, with Paul Tracy pulling in a little bit early? This gave the lead to Michel Jourdain Jr. before he too came into the pits. Thanks to a quicker stop for the right-haul driver, he left the pits with the lead. Around the same time, Patrick Lemarié spun it out of the pits, stalling in the process and bringing out the first full course caution on lap 29. The yellow was brief. As we got back underway on lap 32, Jourdain wasted no time, gunning it as soon as he could and trying to stretch the gap. This would turn out to be an awful restart for the Dale Coyne team, as shortly after Joel Mathias went for a trip into the Turn 8 runoff area, Alex Yoong decided it was time to go home, burying his car into the Turn 1 tires. The yellow came out with this incident, and during the yellow, Mathias had more issues, stopping on track. For maybe the 3rd or 4th time so far this season, Speed Channel missed the ensuing restart. And what a time for them to do it too, because right after the race got back underway, there was another crash. This time it was Rodolfo Levin who hit the wall in Turn 5 and was collected by Roberto Moreno shortly thereafter. It was near disaster for the Walker Racing team, as Levin's teammate Darren Manning nearly got collected himself. Speed Channel nearly missed the ensuing restart. If they did, I probably would have ended the video right there out of protest. Just because we saw it didn't make it interesting though. Seriously, you know a race is boring when Jimmy Vasser going around the outside of Mario Dominguez for 7th drew a strong reaction from the comms crew of Scott Pruitt, Tommy Kendall, and Bob Varsha. The pit stops came back around lap 55, and the different strategies gave us something to talk about. Jourdain and Tracy were the front runners of the drivers at pit around lap 55, while Oriol Servia and Adrian Fernandez were at the front of the drivers that needed to pit around lap 63. After Servia, Fernandez, and Bourdais all led laps, it was Michel Jourdain Jr. back in the lead. The fiery start to Bourdais' season came up again on lap 70, as his motor blew going down the main straightaway. Thankfully for most of the field, Seb could pull off the track and prevent another full course yellow. After this, the focus was on Michel Jourdain Jr. He needed to drive like a bat out of hell to pull the gap he needed before the final pit stop. He needed around 38 seconds to Adrian Fernandez and 4th to be able to pit and come out with the lead again. Even with lap traffic, Jourdain was able to stretch that gap north of 40 seconds. After Paul Tracy came in the lap prior, it was now time for Jourdain to come in too. With 7 laps to go, Jourdain stopped in his box, had a decently quick pit stop, and then his car got stuck in neutral. The man who's in the catbird seat to score his first win was now out of it, and now the fight for the win was between Tracy and Fernandez. Well, I call it a fight, it was more of a parade. They were close, briefly. Fernandez on much older tires didn't have a snowball chance in hell of of getting past PT. Besides Oriol Servio running out of gas, pretty much nothing exciting happened after Jourdain's issue. Paul Tracy would score his third win in a row, 4.5 seconds over Adrian Fernandez in second, and Bruno Junqueira in third. Look, I'll be honest, this race just about had everything that could piss me off about a motorsports event. Boring racing, the rightful winner losing out on victory, and a broadcast about as awe-inspiring as watching a rusty nail get hammered through a gangrenous toe. But the worst part about this race was the TV ratings. The race was watched live on TV by about 69,000 people. That's not just bad, that's stupid. That's less than 7% of the viewership of the 2023 Long Beach Grand Prix, and shows just how badly the series had gone downhill. This race was genuinely painful to sit through. I hope to God the next race of the season in Brands Hatch is at least a little better. Speaking of which, I hope to see you for that race review in 1 week's time. Thank you for watching, and have a great afternoon. Okay, I'll be brutally honest, I've tried making this video 3 or 4 times already in the past. Look, I promised I'd do it in a video I made back in June of 2022, and now that I've committed to making this series, I don't really have much say in the matter, so I'm stuck talking about this race. This race is basically my version of Groundhog Day too, because even while making this video, the audio file corrupted itself while I was on vacation, and now I have to re-record this voiceover. That's why I sound as dead inside as I do. I have no food in this house, I'm running on barely any sleep, I'm extremely tired, haven't even eaten breakfast yet, have a broadcast to do at 9 o'clock tonight, have this voiceover to record, and on my second date back in the city of Philadelphia after my vacation, the whole city got looted last night. This video honestly might be cursed, but I have to make it. But instead of watching me whine and moan about the racing action or lack thereof, this video is going to be a lot less serious. This will be a bit like some of my older, more comedic videos, mainly because if I had to be 100% serious in this video, the video would either be 2 minutes long or I'd want to gouge my eyes out while making it. This is a compromise, because I still want this video to be at least passably entertaining. So with that out of the way, let's roll the title cards and get this fucking show started. The 4th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of bad food and constant drizzle, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hey, you're in the UK, you dumbass.
Wait, what?
Yeah, look at the screen, you four-eyed queer. It says you're in the UK.
Oh, fuck, you're right, man. Alright, let me try that one again. The 4th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of bad food and constant drizzle, the United Kingdom, now run by the world's most famous adult son. He says as an 18-year-old still living with his dad. Funnily enough, my dad actually watched these videos. Usually when I start talking about some random IndyCar stuff downstairs to scare me into my room. And for those asking if my mom watches, joke's on you, she's been dead for 11 years. The 2003 London Champ Car Trophy would be the first American open-wheel race at the Brands Hatch Indy circuit since 1978, a race won by Rick Mears. The race was actually dominated by Danny Ungaius, but a gearbox issue took him out of the race from the lead. Even back in 1978, the sight of IndyCars barreling around the Brands Hatch Indy circuit left some viewers breathless, much like how my mother has been for the past 11 years. Thanks to very fast lap times, the race would be a stunning 165 laps, a ridiculous number for a road course race. For the first time this year, it was championship leader and clean sweeper of the races so far this season, Paul Tracy, grabbing the pole position. Sebastian Bourdais would join him on the front row. Your last place starter would be Rodolfo Levin. Now before we get into the race, let me just say that the bad food line at the start of this video is no exaggeration. Just ask Tommy Kendall who Ralphed at the start of the broadcast. Quite fittingly, this video is brought to you by Pepto-Bismol, America's favorite way of contracting pink poisoning since 1901. Thanks to the formation being more unorganized in my middle school locker, the first attempt at a start got waved off. Thankfully on attempt 2, the green flag would fly and it would be Paul Tracy pulling into the lead, and Sebastian Bourdais pulling in behind. Meanwhile, Jimmy Vasser would pull in almost immediately after his car developed a suspension issue. It was an issue that just about summarized Jimmy Vasser's IndyCar career after 1998. Self-inflicted misery. The issue that took him out of the race appeared to be a simple mistake from the crew. They had changed Vasser's setup wholesale overnight, but something wasn't tightened up properly. Vasser would be out of the race. Very early on, less than 10 laps to be precise, the subject of fuel conservation became a pretty big talking point. As for the racing action, well, let past me talk about it.
So I'm watching the 2003 Champ Car race at Brands Hatch, and the only thing keeping me awake at this very early stage of the race is my laptop, which is currently roasting my testicle.
Besides a big snap for Alex Young, the square root of fucking nothing happened for the rest of the first stint. It's so bad, in fact, that it made me want to sing. Does anyone remember watching the show Whose Line Is It Anyway? Well, I figured that I'd try my hand at one of their segments and do a hoedown. Why, you may ask? Well, what else is there to talk about in this race? Alright, let's give this a whirl. Man, let me tell you something, Champ Car makes me wanna die. The boring racing action makes me really wanna cry. But I can find some action that has come to pass. I just stick a Clorox bleach jab up into my ass. That actually turned out a lot better than I was expecting it to. The pit stops start around lap 50, with Alex Tagliani being the first to pull in. During the pit stops, Darren Manning went off in turn 1 but kept it rolling. A fortunate break for leader Paul Tracy, who had pitched shortly after. I'd show you the pit stop, but the smooth brains at CBS decided they want to show a replay of Darren Manning going off rather than the leader of the race pitting. I can't make this shit up anymore. Bourdais came into the pits 1 lap later, and pulled off a fantastic overcut to get ahead of Tracy. After the pit cycle was done, things got boring again, and the broadcast got sidetracked. They showed a comparison of Formula 1 cars and Champ cars. Then I got the great idea to compare the Speed Channel coverage to the CBS coverage. I mean, they are similar. They have the same frustrating issues that take the luster off the fantastic on-air talent. But right as I was about to make my own graphic explaining this a bit more, the first yellow would come out for Alex Young crashing in turn 2. They never showed a replay of the crash, and were a gnat stick away from missing the ensuing restart. I will send the bill for the emotional damage these broadcasts have done so far this series in writing. Address the 2003 commercial break lane, Sidetrack City, Republic of Too Many Interviews area. There were some interesting things from the restart, like Darren Manning nearly giving a few cars some involuntary prostate exams, shortly followed by Michel Jourdain Jr. gesticulating his arms like a pissed-off orangutan to Tiago Montero. After the next round of pit stops, Paul Tracy's quest for 4 wins in a row ended in spectacular fashion after his Ford engine detonated itself going down the not-so-straight straightaway. Ford, found on road dead. Around this stage of the race, it was actually Alex Tagliani in the lead. But by lap 134, he would pull in, giving the lead to Sebastian Bourdais. Besides an incident for Adrian Fernandez and Ryan Hunter-Reay, the end of the race was no more exciting than the rest of it. Sebastian Bourdais would cross the line to get his first ever Champ Car win and his 4th star in the series, leading the most amount of laps in the process. Bruno Junqueira would finish in second, while Mario Dominguez would bring it home in a brilliant P3. I could best compare this race to my experience in high school. You go into it thinking, oh god, this is gonna last forever, and as the experience gets worse and more bullshit piles up, your will to carry on is on the verge of breaking. And right as your spirit is about to crack, you realize that's all over. But unlike my time in high school where a worldwide pandemic popped up during my freshman year, the bullshit to deal with in this race was just no action to speak of. Sounds like my love life, come to think of it. This was probably the race I was dreading the most when I decided to make this series, but thank God we have finally made it to the other side of it. And now I never have to watch this race ever again. You know, I'm already getting a little sick and tired of the road course crap. I think we need some oval action to spice this series up. Up next, the Champ Cars fight in the land of pretzels and beer. I hope y'all can join me in 1 week's time when the Champ Car series heads to the Lausitz ring. But until then, thank you for watching and have a great afternoon. The 5th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of beer, pretzels, and bad wine, Germany. Specifically, the Champ Car World Series was at EuroSpeedway Lausitz, marking the first oval race of the 2003 season. On a more somber note, this would be Champ Car's return after the race held there in 2001, an event held in the shadows of September 11th, and stained with the legacy of Alex Zanardi's horrifying crash in which he lost both of his legs. After a year and a half of intensive recovery, Alex was there in Germany that day, not as a spectator, but as a driver to complete the 13 laps he didn't finish back in 2001. Zanardi, in an IndyCar using hand controls, wasn't puttering around. In the laps he did, he set a best lap of a 37.487, which would have put him on the grid for the 2003 race in 5th. It just shows that you can take the man out of racing, but you can't take the racing out of the man. Even today, it's still one of the most heartwarming moments in IndyCar history. Godspeed, Alex Zanardi. Getting back on track now and talking about the starting grid, for the 3rd time this year, it was Sebastian Bourdais snagging the pole position, setting the track record in the process. Teammate Bruno Junqueira would join him on the front row. It was a horrible qualifying performance for your championship leader Paul Tracy, who'd start this race down in 16th. The reason for that weirdly stemmed from cost cutting. So basically what happened was that CART mandated the same aero package should be used for both Brands Hatch and the Lausitz ring, one being the high downforce designed for the road course, and the other being the low downforce designed for the oval. So since Tracy had the high downforce package, he really didn't have a snowball chance in hell this weekend. He fought poor handling, engine misfires, and concerns of unreliability ability all weekend. Tracy would have a tough race ahead of him, and so would Adrian Fernandez, who would round off your field in 19th. A special shout out goes to Patrick Lemarié, who qualified for this race in a fairly impressive P10. One big talking point for this race would be the pits, with a pit stop mandate every 27 laps, along with a 2-stage pit limiter. That would be something that we have to keep an eye on. Not to spoil anything coming up this series, but take in the fresh air of there being no driver swaps to speak of. This will be the last race like it until the Cleveland video on November the 8th. With a pre-race jibber-jabber out of the way, we can get into the race proper. The green flag would fly, and it was Bruno Junqueira pouncing on teammate Bourdais to take the lead on lap 1. More drivers shuffled around farther behind, and it was Paul Tracy actually making big gains very early on, breaking into the top 10 less than 3 laps in. But the big story as the race developed was a clashing of teammates, as Bourdais and Junqueira continued to battle for the lead, with Bourdais winning out. This was bad news for Junqueira, who then fell into the crutches of Michel Jourdain Jr. But then as the CBS coverage went to commercial, Junqueira would get back past his teammate. This great battling would have continued if it wasn't for the first yellow of the race coming out on lap 24 for debris. Only 2 laps later, the field flooded down pit road with Junqueira at the front. With a slight setup change for Bourdais, the Newman-Haas cars would maintain their dominance. Meanwhile, farther behind, Patrick Lemarié would be the victim of a crash on pit road. No help from Michel Jourdain Jr.'s pit exit forced Rodolfo Levin into Lemarié, who then slammed into the wall. It was an unfortunate accident for Lemarié, who was having his best Champ Car weekend until then. After CBS just barely cut to the restart as Calvin Fish talked about tires, it was Junqueira in the lead and Sebastian Bourdais falling back. One driver that was in the lead pack was Mario Dominguez, who would take the lead during a commercial break. A commercial break which lasted 12 laps, might I add. At first, when I looked up from my TV and saw lap 50, I was royally confused how we had gone from lap 32 to lap 50 in about 4 minutes. Now I know. Then Sebastian Bourdais got a big turn of pace, and as soon as Bourdais caught up to the lead, the fight started heating up quite nicely. Bourdais was feeling really racy, and was trying to find any way to get past Dominguez, even trying some lawn mowing. Then a few laps later, the second round of pit stops came, which was fairly uneventful. Besides a 15-second penalty that Michel Jourdain Jr. had to serve for the previous round of pit stops, and Alex Tagliani retiring from the race thanks to mechanical issues, this round of pit stops was clean, with Dominguez, Bourdais, and Junqueira staying in the top 3 spots not only out of the pits, but past lap 70 as well. The battle was getting hotter and hotter, and continued to heat up as they went through lap traffic. Dominguez was blocking pretty hard too, so much so that he was actually issued a 5-second penalty for the next round of pit stops. This pit stop would prove to be disastrous for Mario, as a stall along with some general confusion about the penalty left he and the team frustrated. But thankfully for Dominguez, he would stay on the lead lap and get grace with the second full course caution of the day. For the 5th time this season, the TV coverage missed the restart. On that note, I'll let out a quick screech of frustration. Around the same time as the restart, Alex Young would retire from the race thanks to mechanical issues, and with that marks likely the last mention of Alex Young on this channel. The next round of pit stops was nearly disastrous for Mario Dominguez and Sebastian Bourdais, who almost crashed into each other on pit entry. However, this was a great round of pit stops for Michel Jourdain Jr., who'd leapfrog ahead of Bourdais and Dominguez. That wouldn't last very long though, as Jourdain would be passed before he could lead the race. At this stage, things were really winding down action-wise. They even brought Alex Zanardi into the booth to talk about the laps he did earlier. Remember when ABC interviewed Danica Patrick during the final ever Champ Car race in 2008 and completely ignored what was going on to hear some frankly useless insight from Danica Patrick? Well, to anyone looking to interview someone during a race, this is how to do it, folks. The final round of pit stops came and went, and briefly gave the lead to Patrick Carpentier. However, after Carpentier pulled in with 13 laps to go, the lead was given to Sebastian Bourdais, but it wasn't over yet. Bourdais had to hold off Dominguez, who was on a mission to take the win. Over the final 10 laps, the battle was hard fought, extremely close, and brilliant to watch. It would come down to a photo finish, but it was Sebastian Bourdais holding off the challenge to score his 2nd win in a row. Mario Dominguez would finish in 2nd, only 0.08 of a second behind, with Michel Jourdain Jr. inches behind in P3. Bruno Junqueira would finish in 4th, and score enough points to tie Paul Tracy for the championship lead. Pardon my French, but that was f***ing incredible. 154 laps of balls-to-the-wall superspeedway racing. There were 14 lead changes, a photo finish, and compelling storylines, creating an all-around badass event. If you don't like a race like that, then maybe auto racing isn't the sport for you. Let's hope for another fantastic race in 1 week's time. Speaking of which, that'll be at the Milwaukee Mile, and I hope you can all join me for that video in a week's time. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great afternoon.
It's put us at a bit of a disadvantage, but I've talked to a great German philosopher. His name is Thomas Kendelschlang.
The sixth round of the 2003 Champ Car season would take place at the Milwaukee Mile, which was celebrating its 100th anniversary in this race, aptly titled the Centennial 250. The race would be held under the lights, and despite being held on the last day of May, it was frosty in Milwaukee. After 2 days of rain, a cold front came in for the race. Ambient temperatures before the start of the race were 49 degrees Fahrenheit, while the track temperature was 59, and the wind chill was in the 30s. My fleece blanket never felt any better. Coming into this race, there were a whole lot of storylines, so take a deep breath and brace yourselves because we have a lot to cover. As I hinted at last week, there were some driver shuffles before Milwaukee. Alex Young's sponsorship money dried up, so after 4 races he was booted by Dale Coyne and replaced by Walter Salas. Salas hadn't raced in the series since Road America in 2000, but money is money, so he got the drive anyway. Salas' appointment would make him the 4th driver for the team so far that year, and the 3rd driver of the number 11 car in just 6 races. Now it's time to talk about the drivers up front, and the 2 drivers at the front of the standings, Paul Tracy and Bruno Junqueira, were tied, with Tracy under more pressure than ever before off the back of a bad European road trip, and Junqueira looking to score his first win of the season and start swinging the title fight in his favor. That would be a big storyline to follow in the race itself. Top rookie Sebastian Bourdais, off the back of 2 wins in a row, ran into some pretty big issues in Milwaukee. His car had little to no pace, and he even crashed the car in the practice session the morning before the race. The cold temperatures and overall temperamental track conditions created a very shuffled up grid. Qualifying was cancelled thanks to rain, and the starting grid was set by the results from the first practice session. Alex Tagliani would sit on the pole position, with Michel Jourdain Jr. joining him on the front row. Joel Mathias would be our last place starter. Tracy would start 3rd, while Junqueira was in a disappointing 8th. Thanks to the cold temperatures, the start procedure would be changed. After the formation laps, the yellow would be displayed for 2 laps. Laps that counted towards the race where the drivers would go at a quicker pace to warm up their tires before finally packing up and getting the green flag on lap 3. Thanks to Speed Channel, who mentioned that procedure on the 2 laps themselves, giving me barely any time to type out that explanation before the green flag would come out. With that taken care of, we can finally get into the race. The green flag would fly, and as the cars began to battle, chaos would rear its ugly head right away. As exiting the first corner, we'd see a whirlwind of debris and a trifecta of battered race cars. It all started coming through turn 2, as Bruno Junqueira lost it all by his lonesome, backing it hard into the outside wall before getting hit by Mario Dominguez. Farther behind, Patrick Lemarié spun and hit the slowing Roberto Moreno, who then crashed into Junqueira and finally the outside wall. Lemarié, Moreno, and Junqueira would all be out of the race, with Junqueira having to be taken out of his car in a back and neck brace. Because of the crash, many of you probably neglected to notice that Michel Jourdain Jr. took the lead before the accident. Tagliani also lost 2nd to Paul Tracy on the initial start. The caution was long, about 15 laps to be precise, but when the green flag came back out, the racing action heated up immediately, as Jourdain and Tracy went side by side for the lead, while Alex Tagliani would lose the last podium spot to Oriol Servia. Despite the early challenge, Jourdain was riding very comfortably at the front. Despite running less downforce than Tracy, Jourdain was able to run wherever he wanted and was actually pulling away. Even with Jourdain getting held up quite badly by the lap traffic of Bourdais, he was still pulling away from Tracy, who is now being challenged by Servia. The rest of the first stint saw some hair-raising moments, with a big drift from Mario Haberfeld and a close call between Darren Manning and Paul Tracy. Soon after that, the first round of pit stops came around, with the pit exit being the biggest point of excitement. Darren Manning, who leapfrogged from 4th to 2nd in the pits, had a big slide on exit, checking up Oriol Servia and allowing Paul Tracy to pass at both of them. Patrick Carpentier, who had pitted earlier on, would grab the lead during this cycle. However, by lap 72, he would pull in, allowing Mario Dominguez to take the lead for 1 lap, then giving it back to Michel Jourdain Jr. At this point in the race, the Speed Channel coverage did what they usually do, get sidetracked. Seriously, I understand the racing isn't that exciting, but hearing a conversation about tires every single week makes me think they signed on to do this just to get a big paycheck. The 3rd full course yellow would come around on lap 86 after a crash for Ryan Hunter-Reay, with not much changing as Michel Jourdain Jr. would hold on to the lead still. One thing that did change was a will to carry on for Patrick Carpentier, as his gamble to pit early fell apart. I don't know how or why, but this full course caution lasted 22 laps. You'd think with how long this yellow was, they would have some time to prepare for the restart, but you'd be wrong as Speed Channel missed the restart while showing a random replay of a small pit fire. Speed Channel and CBS were actually paid by the series to cover the races, but if I were Champ Car and saw these broadcasts, I'd want my money back. Besides Tracy getting past Oriol Servia on the restart, not a lot was going on. At the halfway mark, your top 5 was Jourdain, Tracy, Servia, Olivier Carpentier and Adrian Fernandez. A short while after the field pulled down pit road for yet another round of stops, there would be another caution. It was Joel Camathias who crashed in turn 2. The yellow came and went, the restart came around on lap 68, the laps buzzed by, and after quite some time, it was time for the final pit stops. Back in Long Beach, it was Jourdain in the lead at the last stop before a mechanical issue ended his chances and gave the win to Tracy, while a few races later, the final pit stop came and went, and this time it was Tracy at the receiving end of an issue. During a disastrous last stop for Tracy where the car was dropped off the jacks, his left rear tire wasn't secured, and heading through turn 4 the wheel came off. Tracy would have to pit again and was hit with a 1-lap penalty for losing a wheel on track. Because of the loose wheel, the 5th full course yellow would come out. Tracy was now completely out of contention, so the fight was now down to Michel Jourdain Jr. and Oriol Servia. With 26 laps to go, the green flag was back out, but almost immediately the yellow would come out again after Rodolfo Levin crashed in turn 2. It was a somewhat violent crash with how hard the car was jerking against the wall, but thankfully Levin was uninjured. After the cleanup and a failed first attempt, the race was restarted with 10 laps to go. They were close, but the 10-lap shootout was surprisingly tame. After leading 234 laps on the day, Michel Jourdain Jr. would put on a dominant show to get his first ever Champ Car win. And with the trouble that Junqueira and Tracy ran into during the race, Jourdain would also pick up the championship lead in the process. Oriol Servia would finish in second, and Patrick Carpentier would come home in third. This race certainly had some ebb and flow to it. There were some parts that were action-packed while others were boring, but this race was still one of the best this year. It had big shoes to fill considering how the Lausitz ring was, but it was still a good race. Next up on the schedule is Laguna Seca, and even though I wish we had 3 ovals in a row, you need to have some variety here and there, so I understand why the Champ Car schedule decided to put 2 ovals in a row just to save the rest of them for the rest of the year. I can't wait for the next oval. These cars just race on them so well. Hey, I might want to take a look at the schedule, man. What do you mean they don't race on them until the season finale? You knew about that before you even started making the series, you're just playing it up for a bit at the end of the video. Are you telling me that I have 12 road course races I have to sit through until the next oval? Look, I'm not here trying to ruin a bit, I'm just saying that it's 8:26 in the morning, I would quite like to be able to go downstairs and finish up the everything bagels before they mold in a few days, because you know as well as I do, because we're the exact same people, that moldy bread grosses you out. So stick to your end of the script and I'll get out of your hair. God fuck! The 7th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of good wine, arrogant people, and a new ban on Skittles, California. We're at Laguna Seca this time around, and what a race we have on our hands. I got warned by a commenter a few weeks ago that this race was going to be boring, and I took that warning to heart. So after the last time I did this got an overall positive reception, the stopgap solution from now on will be that if any race is overly boring, the corresponding video will be nowhere close to serious. But there's some news-related business that I've got to cover before the start, and I need to treat it seriously. I had a music teacher back in elementary school. His name was Dr. Gongo and he was originally from Nigeria. He'd often impart wisdom on the class, and despite the fact that 10 years has passed and he's unfortunately passed away since then, there's one quote from him that sticks with me. If an old man gives you a chicken, you must treat it like a tuba. Place your hands properly and wash it every Wednesday. Despite the fact that I've never held a tuba, or a chicken for that matter, I've lived my life by that statement ever since. I feel the need to treat this driver news with the same respect. So to talk about it in a professional manner, what I was originally going to do was record this next piece after I got home from the dentist on October 16th. This would have been right after a cavity filling, with my face entirely numb from the lidocaine. So you can imagine my disappointment when I went in today and they said I needed a root canal. This is doubly disappointing, because not only do I need a root canal, the only bit that I was looking forward to in this video had to be abandoned. So in the biggest blue balls moment since Lola Bunny's redesign for Space Jam 2, here is a lidocaine-free silly season report. In the world of Champ Car between the races in Milwaukee and Laguna Seca, there were multiple shuffles. For the 4th time this season, Dale Coyne Racing would switch up their lineup. Walter Salas, who was drafted in as a temporary replacement for Alex Young, had now been replaced himself by Jeff Boss, a one-time winner in the Indy Lights series back in 1999. Boss brought in funding from fashion company Lacoste and would stay with the team through to the end of the year. But as one driver came in with a French sponsor, a French driver was left on the sidelines. Patrick Lemarié, after a rough start to the year, was at a PK Racing. The team won a trusty Laguna Seca hand for this round, so they drafted in Brian Herta. Herta was in the midst of a full-time season in the Indy Racing League with Andretti Green Racing, but for this round and this round only, he was brought in as a replacement. Stay tuned next week because this is far from the end of the driver news. Qualifying was pretty dramatic, with Michel Jourdain Jr. setting the fastest time, then then getting disqualified for running underweight. Patrick Carpentier would inherit the pole position, sharing the front row with Bruno Junqueira. Jourdain would start down 13th, a really upsetting position to start as a championship leader. Jeff Boss would be your last place starter. The pre-race was a tad abridged, so we don't have anything else to talk about before the race. Really, with how the race went, I could end the video right here. After a completely unorganized start where Carpentier was hit by his teammate and everyone scrambled, the initial start was waved off. It seemed like Bob Varsha didn't get the memo though, as he called it like they took the green.
And now the field forms up side by side. Flagman J.D. Wilbur has the flag. We've got some tire smoke from the middle of the first few rows. It gets a bit scrambled, 3 and 4 wide. Everybody wants to lead lap 1 at Laguna Seca. It is so difficult to pass as they head for the Andretti hairpin.
In fairness, you can't really blame the guy if he was only half awake. The second time around, we would grab the green, and it was Carpentier holding onto the lead, some off-roading in the back of the pack, and a nice battle between Herta and Jourdain. And that's about it. Barely over a tenth of the way into this race, I was already dozing off. Unfortunately for me, my phone had other plans. The start of the race was horrible for Walker Racing, as on lap 10 Rodolfo Levin retired with a gearbox issue, and only 2 laps later Darren Manning retired from the race with a blown motor. Before I go back to sleep, let me ask one quick thing. Is it just me, or is the music that CBS played before the commercial break something you'd hear on a late night talk show?
CBS Sports coverage of the Champ Car Grand Prix of Monterrey will continue after this message and a word from your local station.
The pit stops came on lap 24, and it was Carpentier still holding the lead. Besides Jeff Boss basically crawling down the corkscrew for reasons that will remain a mystery because CBS never showed a replay, basically nothing was going on. Even the broadcast couldn't care less, as they spent quite a lot of time talking to Darren Manning. Well, that was until a mistake from Carpentier that nearly gave the lead to Tracy. It didn't, but I still need to talk about it anyways. The order stayed the same after the second round of pit stops, and was still the same until Paul Tracy did some rallying action coming through turn 6 on lap 57. This was soon followed by Sebastian Bourdais having a pop-off valve issue which made him drop back like a rock. The final round of pit stops came in the last 15 laps, and yet again the podium order was the same. Sebastian Bourdais retiring with 10 laps to go was really the last flash in the pan for this race. Patrick Carpentier would take a flag-to-flag win over Bruno Junqueira in second, and Paul Tracy in a very distant third. This was Carpentier's 4th Champ Car win. Michel Jourdain Jr. put on a great recovery drive to make it up to P4, holding on to the championship lead, but only just. Look, I'm not going to mince words. That race was pretty damn awful. I will say it had one positive, and that was that this race went by pretty quick. The race had an average speed of over 107.8 miles an hour. Besides that, there's not too much else to say. You could tell the race was bad when the pre-race talk in this video is actually longer than me talking about the race itself. Really, the most exciting part of this race was calling up an endodontist near me to schedule my root canal, which was quite funny because I actually scheduled that appointment while I was recording this audio. This was by far the most boring race I've ever talked about, and I hope we don't one-up it for the rest of the season. So considering that I have nothing else to say, and the fact I need to get this video done quickly considering the root canal is actually going to be the day that I post this exact video, I'm just going to leave it at that. Next up is Portland, and I hope you can join me in a week's time. I really need the ad revenue because I've got to pay for that root canal somehow. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The 8th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of homeless drug addicts and pretentious trendy millennial hipsters, Portland, Oregon. It being the Northwest, rain was a big factor throughout the weekend. A fair amount of practice and qualifying was rain affected, with the potential of showers even during the race. However, it was the always bombastic Paul Tracy that stole the headlines throughout the weekend. I just have to read some of the quotes that he riffed off to the media this weekend. Well, I've got one thing to say to all these would-be race car drivers. You shouldn't throw stones if you live in a glass house. And if you got a glass jaw, then you should watch your mouth. This next one's in reference to an incident where Tracy impeded Ryan Hunter-Reay during qualifying. RHR's later disqualification from that qualifying session for running underweight, along with a nice jab after Michel Jourdain Jr.'s disqualification in Laguna Seca. Well, I don't know what happened with Ryan, but it doesn't really matter because he was cheating. And on the subject of cheating, did Rahul's car pass tech yesterday? I'm not sure if he passed it or not. Then after grabbing the pole position, he said this: "That's a message to all these naysayers down the pit lane that PT is for shizzleman is all. I'm gonna show Jourdain who's the boss applesauce." You know, considering my root canals forced me to eat applesauce and other non-solid foods for the next week, I'm thankful that Paul Tracy said that quote 20 years ago. It got a laugh at me, which is good considering what's been going on as of late. And finally, we have the most gangster quote of them all right before the race. Well, the only thing that really matters to me is what my guys here think. And to me, all that matters is that my money comes in heaps and the kids love me in the streets. Love him or hate him, Paul Tracy was and still is a funny dude. Sure, he's a couple french fries short of a Happy Meal, but I'm a dried cherry short of a fruitcake, so do I really have any room to judge? One thing that I've neglected to mention so far is the silly season news. That's surprising because yet again we have a lot to cover. But instead of doing this normally, I'm going to do what I was meant to do last week. I was meant to get a cavity filling done on Monday, October 16th, but all I got was the news I actually need a root canal. So 1 week later than originally expected, I'm going to fulfill this promise. It's the afternoon of October 23rd as I record this audio, and in about 3 hours time I'll be back from the endodontist with my mouth still completely numb, my eyes filled to the brim with tears thanks to the $1,200 bill, and my loins girded well enough to finally bring you the Lidocaine Silly Season Report. Whatever divine entity there is looking over this planet must have some kind of objection to this bit because while recording that lead-in, the lawn care people came and started mowing the lawn. I'd usually wait and record after they leave, but I have to get to this appointment in less than an hour and a half. But anyways, grab a soft blanket, light a scented candle, and prepare to laugh your ears off for what I hope will be the funniest minute in the history of this channel. The doctors only numbed half of my face, so they're gonna be half as funny as I expected it to. In the midst of the West Coast swing for the Champ Car Series, there were even more driver shuffles. We'll get the expected one out of the way first. At PK Racing, Max Pappas was now in that seat for the rest of the season. Brian Herta, who had driven for the team in Laguna Seca, was just a one-off while Max had other obligations to attend to. Meanwhile, at the wonderful world of Dale Coyne Racing, Quattro Salas was back at the team. He had previously replaced Alex Young and was now replacing Swiss driver Joel Camathias. The Dale Coyne lineup was now completely different, with Jeff Boss and Quattro Salas completing their lineup, at least for now. Camathias and Young weren't covered too much in the series, but I've already made videos going over Young and Camathias' respective Champ Car careers. Now if you excuse me, I'm off to eat applesauce for the next 3 days, and also schedule my appointment for putting in the crown. Am I sick for making myself do this? Maybe, but is it going to be funny? I fucking hope so. As I briefly mentioned a few moments ago, it would be Paul Tracy grabbing the pole position. Championship leader Michel Jourdain Jr. would join him on the front row. Quattro Salas would be your 19th and last place starter. It was a big qualifying result for Bruno Junqueira, who'd start the race in 11th. With everything taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. For the second race in a row, we'd have a waved off start. Any more of those and we might need to make a drinking game out of it. This was off the back of the year prior that saw 4 attempts at a start, but that's a topic for another day. Coming around for take 2 and another false start. Maybe if we actually made a drinking game, the alcohol would help with my tooth pain. Well, third time's a charm, right? Oh, you've got to be fucking kidding me. Take 4 this time, and let's grab the green for the love of Christ. The green flag would fly, and with a surprisingly clean start, it was Michel Jourdain Jr. grabbing the lead, Oriol Servia taking the turn 1 detour, and I believe Rodolfo Levin going for some lawn mowing on exit. For the first 10 laps, really the biggest story of note was a gearbox issue for Tiago Monteiro, an issue which took him out of the race. However, once we broke past the lap 10 barrier, things started to heat up. Sebastian Bourdais, who was running in 4th, had a left rear tire going down, so by lap 14, the Frenchman came in. This was shortly followed by a spin off the road and subsequent stall for Jeff Boss, which would bring the yellow out. Right after this came the first series of pit stops, where not a lot changed as it was Michel Jourdain Jr. holding onto the lead. Meanwhile, things got worse for Dale Coyne, as Quattro Salas, who had developed an oil leak in the first stint, was forced to pull off the track because of that issue. The restart came and a whole lot happened after this besides Bourdais cutting through the field and Ryan Hunter-Reay falling out of the race with a clutch issue. Besides those two things, not a whole lot was going on as most of the field paced themselves and wore away the laps. But just short of the halfway mark, things really started to heat up again. As the pit stops neared, Paul Tracy was slowly reeling in Jourdain. The gap was down to about 1.5 seconds when the two came into the pits. Tracy would take less fuel and grab the lead just barely over his rival. But just a lap after they nearly made contact on pit road, the two would come to blows going through the chicane. It was a dive from Michel Jourdain Jr. that got them side by side. Then they bottlenecked into 2, locked wheels, and Jourdain was spun around. Jourdain needed to get restarted, and the yellow was back out. The restart came on lap 47 with Paul Tracy in the lead. Things cooled off yet again, but still wasn't all that boring. That's good for me because even if I liked coffee, I don't think I can drink it until I put my crown in. Well, there was some drama going on, as Paul Tracy picked up a 5-second penalty for the pit road chicanery with Jourdain. He'd served this at the next pit stop, and surprisingly, Tracy came back out with the lead, but only by about a second. This gave the lead to Sebastian Bourdais for just one lap before he came in too. The topic of weather was slowly becoming a big talking point, but ramped up quite a lot after Patrick Carpentier had a hard crash in turn 6. Carpentier would be alright but was out of the race. The rain was still lingering come time for the restart, but wasn't hard enough to bring anyone in. However, it was damp enough for Jeff Boss to lose his rear wing and bring out the full course caution. I'd love to tell you what happened, but CBS never showed a replay. They also missed the restart, which at this point doesn't make me nearly as angry as it should. Thankfully, what they didn't miss was Adrian Fernandez making the pass for the lead. They also didn't miss this turn 1 shindig between Rodolfo Levin and Max Pappas, which ended in Pappas retiring from the race with a broken right front. The 6th yellow came out to retrieve the broken car, with the restart coming with 10 laps left. The attention was set to be on the battle at the front, but it wasn't much of a fight. Besides an issue for Sebastian Bourdais which took him out of the race, the late race shootout was more of a poetry reading. After leading just 15 laps on the day, Adrian Fernandez would take the checkered flag to score his 8th Champ Car win, and his first in Surfers Paradise in 2000. In doing so, Fernandez became the first owner-driver to win a Champ Car race since Bobby Rahal won at Nazareth back in 1992. Paul Tracy would finish in 2nd, taking the championship lead in the process, while Alex Tagliani would come home in 3rd. That race was actually pretty solid. It wasn't the most exciting of them all, but in reference to all the races I've covered so far this series, it's pretty good. I don't have much else to say other than that. Next up is Cleveland, and we'll be racing under the lights. That's gonna be pretty cool. I'm genuinely excited for that race. If you are too, then you know where to be for that race review in a week's time. Before I round this video off, I just want to thank all of you for all the nice comments you left on community posts a few weeks ago. My tooth is still a little sore and my mouth hurts a little bit from recording this audio, but really nothing that a bit of Advil can't fix. The first week in November is when I'll probably be getting the crown put in, and after that, this fustercluck of a situation will be in our rearview mirror. But seriously, thank you all for the support, it really means a lot to me. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The 9th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of the river that once caught on fire and houses for the price of a VCR, Cleveland, Ohio. The joke of Cleveland seeing the sun 3 times a year certainly rang true this weekend, as a race would be held under the lights. Security was a big issue this weekend. It being Cleveland at night, the chances of getting robbed are pretty high. I can't really judge though. At 9 Philadelphia, you'd get hit by a reckless drunk driver, land on used hypodermic needles, get kicked by a loudmouth Eagles fan, robbed by a disgruntled Phillies fan, stabbed by the only guy in the city who still supports a Flyers, then shot by someone who the police will never catch, before hopping on a SEPTA bus and getting into a car crash on the way to the hospital. Philadelphia slander notwithstanding, there isn't a whole lot to talk about in the pre-race. For the first time since round 5 at the Lausitz ring, there were no driver changes. Thank Christ. However, the race weekend itself was still dramatic. Tracy and Jourdain once again had a bit of a scuffle, this time during practice, which resulted in a pit lane shouting match. Sebastian Bourdais in his first race driving the soon-to-be famous McDonald's colors would take the pole position. Paul Tracy in his 200 series start would join him on the front row. Jeff Boss would be your last place starter, while Tiago Monteiro was withdrawn from the race after a hard crash in practice that gave him a minor concussion. A big talking point prior to the start was a washed-away rubber after a rainstorm earlier that day. The rain chance continued for the race, with a possibility of scattered thunderstorms. With everything taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. For the first time in weeks, we'd get the green flag on the first time around, and thanks to a massive overshoot going into turn 1 for your pole sitter, it was Paul Tracy taking the lead and leading the first lap of a race for the first time this season. However, the comms crew didn't notice it, and the masochists in the production hauler didn't even show a replay for them until lap 8. But while that was going on, Michel Jourdain Jr. had a big spin coming out of turn 4, and despite dropping down to the end of the field, the only damage Jourdain had was to his ego. Besides that, the start was calm, with the biggest points of excitement being the recovery driver Jourdain and the ongoing sunset. By lap 16, the classic Cleveland chaos came around. It was a turn 1 incident with Jimmy Vasser and Roberto Moreno that left Moreno stopped on track with damage. Vasser went for a dive into turn 1 and just cleaned at Moreno. It was a move as desperate as Vasser's attempts to stick it to the IRL by not racing there, even with how badly it screwed over his career. There were some pit stops during this cycle, with the order remaining the same. The green was out again, briefly, as a stopped car of Walter Salas brought the yellow back out. Salas had a broken throttle cable, so so he was left stranded in turn 4 and was now out of the race. After his car was towed away, the race was back underway with Tracy still in the lead. During the following green flag stint, Bob Varsha and Tommy Kendall were talking about how Paul Tracy had donated money to Lance Armstrong's foundation, and actually spent some time with Lance in Las Vegas. Thanks to the Dinner with Racers podcast, we now know what happened.
And he walks me back into these private rooms and opens up the door, and there's Lance in there, and there's a couple of his manager guys. I can't remember the names now off the top of my head, and a couple other riders, and about 10 prostitutes. And a whole table full of alcohol, like.
The second round of pit stops came, with the order remaining the same. Really, the only point of action was Jeff Boss retiring with suspension damage, a retirement that was completely ignored by the broadcast. Then just barely over the halfway mark on lap 58, the third full course yellow came out after Rodolfo Levin spun and stalled it heading into turn 8. After CBS just barely caught the ensuing restart, the focus was on the nearing third round of pit stops for most of the field. I say most. Jimmy Vasser had pitted during the yellow thanks to a slow puncture. He would have to pit later on and was out of contention. The pit stops for the leaders came around lap 69. Nice. And even nicer was a bit of action. Sebastian Bourdais short filled to get ahead of Tracy. This pit cycle gave the lead to the aforementioned Jimmy Vasser before he pitted again on lap 83, giving the race lead to Bourdais. He maintained the lead even after the last round of pit stops. He was on his way to an easy win, but after he made contact with Adrian Fernandez, things got much harder after a late race yellow after a spin and stall for Jimmy Vasser. After a green-white checkered finish, Sebastian Bourdais would score his third win of the season. Paul Tracy would finish in second, and Bruno Junqueira would come home in third. That race was a pretty big letdown. Of the first 9 races, it's probably the third worst, up there on the podium with Long Beach and Laguna Seca. We may have a doozy on our hands next week in Toronto, and I hope y'all can join me for that race review. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The 10th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of maple syrups and hockey rinks, Canada. We're in the Canadian sweep now, as this week the Champ Car Series races in the streets of Toronto. The biggest storyline yet again was Paul Tracy. The hometown hero would take the pole position on the 10-year anniversary of his last win in his hometown. His main challenger this weekend seemed to be Bruno Junqueira, but Tracy wasn't very fazed, taunting Junqueira with an invitation to look at his trophy cabinet.
Well, you have to consider the source. His teammate has won 3 races and won 3 poles, and Bruno says that he doesn't know anything about cars. So I'm plenty happy to invite him over to look at my trophy case anytime and see how many trophies I've got to see if I crack.
Good point.
Gotta love Tracy. Junqueira was looking to prove something this weekend. He entered the season as a championship favorite, but despite being only 8 points behind championship leader Tracy, he was still looking for that first win on the year. The battle between those two would be one to watch, as Junqueira joined him on the front row. Dale Coyne Racing's Jeff Boss would be your 19th and last place starter. Speaking of Coyne, there was another shuffle there, as Alex Sparafico would take over the number 19 car from Walter Salas, who had previous obligations to attend to for the Toronto weekend. Speaking of drivers, one was returning in the form of Tiago Monteiro. After suffering a minor concussion in Cleveland, he was back in the car and ready to go. Heading into this race, I had a looming feeling of dread. Both a scented candle lit next to me, I realized that this series will give me at least a little bit more money to buy some more scented candles. With the pre-race taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. The green flag came out with a bit of a jump. It was Paul Tracy throwing a punch early on and taking the lead. Meanwhile, farther behind, Alex Tagliani had a great start, jumping into the podium places. But as Tracy pulled away, carnage ensued behind with a big pileup in turn 3. It all started with Darren Manning giving a love tap to Jimmy Vasser, who then ran into Adrian Fernandez. With the two cars stuck together blocking most of the track, the yellow had to come out. was a disaster for the American Team Spirit Johansson team, as both Vassar and Ryan Hunter-Reay would go a lap down. The CBS cover just barely caught the restart on lap 3. I really shouldn't even bother mentioning these at this point. If I had $1 for every time I complained about the broadcast while making this series, I'd have a collection of leased thongs in my closet and wouldn't be living in the city of Philadelphia. The field was clean this time around, for a few moments. Not very long after this, another incident took place. Once again in turn 3, but this time involving Alex Sparafico and Mario Haberfeld. Haberfeld went to the corner completely locked up and about 50 miles an hour quicker than anyone else, hitting Sparafico in the process, taking the two out of the race, and bringing out the second full course caution. Haberfeld and his team believe something broke on the car, but they never said what exactly broke. Let me point something out about this incident. They didn't show replay of the crash for about 10 minutes. The race had already been restarted by the time they showed a replay of it. Speaking of the restart and replays, CBS missed the ensuing restart while showing some replays of the start. These broadcasts are just so infuriatingly awful. The smell of scented candles are the only thing that keep me sane when watching them. Considering the racing action was practically non-existent in the first 20 laps, and practically non-existent for the whole race for that matter, I'll just talk about scented candles for the next few minutes. It's not like we're missing anything exciting, so let me set the calming music and drop the overly exciting voice. Welcome everybody to Candle Corner. The candle I lit for this race is a Black Cherry Merlot 3-wick candle from White Barn. I purchased this from a Bath & Body Works near Baltimore in early August of 2023. The label on it says it has hints of ripe cherry, Merlot, and red raspberry. As someone who has always enjoyed raspberry as both a scent and a flavor, I was attracted to this candle when I saw that. This race, which I watched on November 7th, was also the first time I had lit this candle, and I can say that it was an enjoyable and calming experience with an enjoyable and calming aroma. I also enjoy the purplish pink color of the stained glass that the candle was in. The scent was very naturey, if that's even a word. The candle's smell also has a nice sweetness to it that was neither sickeningly overwhelming or unnoticeably faint. It feels like the sort of aroma you'd get from a freshly brewed fruity tea. It's an elegant blend of nature-based aromas. I would say that if everything I've described so far is exactly what you want in a candle, then the Black Cherry Merlot is right for you. Overall, it's a natural aroma which feels most fitting for the fall season, but could be used at any time of the year and still deliver a pleasurable experience. I would recommend this candle to you. And if you enjoyed even more, there's also Bath & Body Works branded hand sanitizers, hand lotions, and soaps with the same scent. This has been the very first edition of the Candle Corner. Now back to the racing action from the 2003 Molson Indy Toronto. I say action, I'd be more excited watching blue whale sex with my cock stuck in an anthill. Some action started popping up around lap 25, with Mario Dominguez backing his car into the turn 8 wall, nearly getting hit by Adrian Fernandez in the process. Dominguez was running in the top 10 at the time, but this incident would severely damage his race. An even harder kick in the shins came to Alex Tagliani and his team only a few laps later. He had broken a right rear toe link after getting hit by Bruno Junqueira in turn 3, and was taken out of the race from second. Then not very long after this, the pit stops came around with nothing changing up towards the front as Tracy exited the pit road with the lead. By lap 36, Tracy had began lapping cars running in the top 10 and was leading the race by over 17 seconds. The biggest point of action in this stage was Max Pappas having a catastrophic suspension failure going down Lakeshore Boulevard. He not only needed to retire from the race because of it, he also probably needed a change of pants after that. With nothing else of note going on at this stage, I figured I'd share a nice fun fact about this race. According to the broadcast, there's a camera crew at the track filming a pilot for a reality TV show named Life of the Champs, who for this episode were following Jimmy Vassar. To my knowledge, this show never saw the light of day. Tracy kept the lead after the second round of pit stops, and in all honesty, I was starting to doze off. But this race finally got a shot on the R1 lap 78, as an incident with Jimmy Vassar and Mario Dominguez left Vassar stalled on the outside of turn 3. The full course yellow came out for this, ending a 70-lap green flag streak. Tracy's lead was around 33 seconds at the time. Under the yellow, the final pit window opened. There's some weird contention around this, with Bruno Junqueira somehow not catching up to Tracy before the pit stops. Then Junqueira's team was trying to tell the race officials to close the pits. It was strange more than anything else. Tracy was able to hold on to the lead through this, while Junqueira dropped down the order, giving P2 to Michel Jourdain Jr. After an aborted first attempt at the restart, they'd get the race restarted on lap 85. Jourdain needed to keep Tracy within striking distance. Guess what he didn't do? After just one lap, the gap was already north of a second. The gap spread more and more as the laps ticked down, and my boredom increased more and more too. Paul Tracy would lead every lap and take the checkered flag flag to score the victory in the 2003 Molson Indy Toronto, winning at the track 10 years after his last win there and taking his 4th victory of the season. Michel Jourdain Jr. would finish about 5 seconds behind in 2nd, while Bruno Junqueira would come home in 3rd. Tracy's win in this race, as far as I'm concerned, was his racing magnum opus, as he absolutely crushed the field. Holy Christ, that was a bad race. That, I think, is a new low from the season, beating out Laguna Seca and Long Beach. I can't really dread about completing the rest of this series, though. We're now officially halfway through it, so I guess that's something. Besides that, there's not a lot to talk about. Even the CBS broadcast realizes, as there's no post-race show after they interviewed Tracy. If they have nothing else to say, neither do I. Next race is Vancouver, and I hope you can all join me in 1 week's time. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The 11th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land of moose and not much else, Canada. We're racing in Vancouver this time around, a town which, according to the first result on Google when looking up what Vancouver is known for, has Queen Elizabeth Park, a bunch of trees inside a fence named after a dead lizard. Entering the weekend, Paul Tracy was on a roll after the dominant win he had in Toronto. However, the Vancouver weekend wasn't very smooth. Tracy grabbed the provisional pole on Friday qualifying, but had that revoked after he was accused by Bruno Junqueira and Alex Agliani of blocking. Tracy then crashed in Saturday morning practice before retaking the pole position later that day. Tracy was still a bit irked though, delivering this hilarious moment to the media.
Well, first off, there's an incurable deadly disease going up and down the pit lane from Tagliani's pit and Junkie. It's called Weineritis, so I don't want to catch it. That's why I have this mask on.
There are some other storylines of note. The fantastic qualifying performance for Roberto Moreno was one of them, as a 2001 Vancouver winner would start this race in 3rd. Speaking of some other Brazilians, the Dale Coyne shuffle continued as Walter Salles was back in the number 19 car, taking it back from Alex Barafico, who replaced him in Toronto. There's another return, as for the first time since Milwaukee, Speed Channel was back. It's nice to finally have a pre-race show again, because I could actually write this part of the video while watching the broadcast. And right as I wrote the praises for the Speed Channel coverage, they had the worst ever episode of MTV Cribs with Darren Manning. Just look at that refrigerator. Oh. Championship rivals Paul Tracy and Bruno Junqueira would be on the front row. Jeff Boss was meant to be your 19th and last place starter, but he crashed during the pace laps. Nobody felt worse about this than his teammate Walter Salles, who crashed as well shortly thereafter. Before the race even started, both Dale Coyne cars would be at the race. With Salles' car on the side of the road, the field would start the race under yellow, but after a few laps we'd finally get the green flag. With a big jump, it was Bruno Junqueira taking the lead, but almost immediately chaos broke out. First, it was Sebastian Bourdais hitting Roberto Moreno in turn 1, sending the Brazilian into the outside wall. Then just a few corners later, there's another crash involving Mario Dominguez, Thiago Monteiro, and Oriol Servia. Servia was hit by Monteiro, who slowed down as a result and was then rear-ended by Dominguez. Moreno would be out of the race after the turn 1 crash, while Oriol Servia was out of the race with broken right rear suspension. Monteiro and Dominguez would pick up damage but stay in the race, albeit multiple laps down. We'd just barely pick up the restart on lap 8 while Speed Channel was busy showing their weekly Bridgestone piece with Calvin Fish. I mean, I get it, the tires are important in racing, but you don't have to remind us every single week. The restart was clean, as a front duo of Bruno Junqueira and Paul Tracy began to pull away. But as they pulled away, there's a lot of discussion going on about the start. The decision came that Bruno Junqueira jumped the start and had to let Tracy by. The anger for this incident didn't fall on Junqueira, but rather fell down the starter for this, as despite it being a pretty clear jump for Junqueira, they waved the green flag anyways. It was just weird and confusing, but the decision was made and the penalty had to be served. That would unfold on lap 24, and it was pretty much the end for Junqueira. The pit stops came shortly after this, where Tracy got out clean, while Junqueira stalled it. But the saving grace for Junqueira came just a couple laps later. It was Alex Agliani and Thiago Monteiro in turn 12, with both cars destroyed and the track littered with debris. Monteiro went for a pointless dive on Tagliani, pitching tags up on 2 wheels, sending him into the wall and taking the both of them out of the race. Monteiro was many laps down at the time too, making this crash even more unnecessary. The restart came on lap 37 with Tracy in the lead and teammate Carpentier in second. The action on this restart was further towards the back of the pack, as Tracy began to grow his lead. Things cooled off for a while after this stint, with not much happening until the next round of pit stops. Tracy led by about 15 seconds when he pulled into the pits on lap 60, exiting the pits and continuing his race without incident. The same couldn't be said about his teammate. Carpentier would be taken out of the race after Mario Dominguez went for a dive bomb and just cleaned out Carpentier. It was a move met with frustration, with no one being more upset than Scott Pruitt.
Yeah, I doubt if he would have made it in. He was up the inside, got in too deep, trying to make a bold move. Dumbass move.
Sebastian Bourdais was in the lead at this stage, for a handful of laps that is. Then when he came in, it gave the lead back to Tracy. He was putting another clinic on the field, lapping up to Adrian Fernandez in 6th. Speaking of Fernandez, he was having engine issues. This came to a climax on lap 74, as he was black flagged for spraying oil on track. Despite the commentary crew acting like the track had been turned into a slip and slide, it was just pure over-exaggeration. The final round of pit stops came and went in the last 10 laps, with Tracy getting out clean. Paul Tracy would take the checkered flag and score the victory in the 2003 Molson Indy Vancouver, winning by about 18 seconds. Bruno Junqueira would finish in 2nd, and Sebastian Bourdais would come home in 3rd. Look, that really wasn't a good race, but compared to the snoozer that was Toronto, it was alright. Besides a few hiccups, the broadcast was alright too. Really, besides that, I don't have much else to say. Next up is Road America, and with it comes a slight issue that I'll have to discuss next week. But until then, thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The 12th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in Cheeseland, Wisconsin. We're at Road America this week, and in lieu of a pre-race show that the broadcast didn't have, here's a PSA that I promised in the Vancouver video last week. Alright, so at the very end of the Vancouver race review, I mentioned that there's going to be a slight issue for this race at Road America. This race wasn't broadcasted on Speed Channel or CBS, it was on HDNet. Now some of you may be asking, why wasn't it on the other channels? Well, that story is long, complicated, and would probably bore you all to tears. So here's a Cliff Notes version. Champ Car said that the track didn't pay their sanctioning fees for the 2002 race, so they canceled the 2003 race in March. 1 month and several lawsuits later, the race got reinstated. But in that month of the race being up in the air, CBS and Speed cut their obligations to cover the race, so HDNet stepped in. Despite the race being broadcasted in North America in high definition, the footage you'll see in this video is in 360p. The only surviving copy of the broadcast on YouTube is in a resolution that was considered poor back when I was in preschool, so get the eye bleach ready because I think you're gonna need it. As you could probably tell from the footage you've seen so far, the race would be affected heavily by rain. And when I say it was affected by rain, I mean it. Bruno Junqueira would grab the pole for this race, with his teammate Sebastian Bourdais joining him on the front row. It was a rough qualifying result for championship leader Paul Tracy, as he would start this race in 6th. Jeff Boss would be your 19th and last place starter. For the second week in a row, there were issues during the pace laps, with Paul Tracy having some radio trouble. However, there are some more pressing issues on everyone's mind. The race would start beyond the safety car, but even under yellow, the whole field was complaining about the track conditions and the visibility. These feelings were even stronger after an incident for Rodolfo Levin in turn 5. After putting just 1 lap on the board, the red flag would come out. During the ensuing 20-minute long red flag, officials sent jet dryers out on track, but the main concern was with the weather forecast. There's even more rain on the way, so as such the planned 60 laps was reduced to 47. As the red flag period ended, there were some issues for Walter Salas, who had trouble getting his car rolling. He'd eventually get the car restarted. The same couldn't be said about the race. After even more laps beyond the safety car, the red flag would come out once again. This red flag was much longer, 2 hours and 40 minutes long to be precise. Yet again during this red flag, the race distance was shortened, now down to just 34 laps. Technically only 27 after the previous 7 under yellow. But no matter, after those 2 hours and 40 minutes had passed, the red flag was gone, and the hope was to get the race under green the next time by. But this hope was crushed after Oriol Servia spun and hit the wall entering Canada corner. Servia would be out of the race, and the yellow remained. But soon enough, Servia's car was cleared away. And finally, after 3 hours of yellow flag parades and red flag charades, the green flag would finally come out. The green flag flew in with a single file starter as Bruno Junqueira staying in the lead, and Paul Tracy jumping into 4th. Meanwhile, Patrick Carpentier was feeling really racy with Sebastian Bourdais. They were battling tooth and nail and slowed themselves to the point of falling into the crutches of Tracy. But Tracy's pounce on the two of them ended in disaster, as in turn 8 he ran wide, went into the gravel trap, then hit the wall. In that same corner a few moments later, there's another crash, that being a pileup involving Michel Jourdain Jr., Tiago Monteiro, Darren Manning, and Roberto Moreno. Jourdain, Monteiro, and Tracy would all be out of the race, while Roberto Moreno and Darren Manning would continue on with damage. This was a dream scenario for Bruno Junqueira, who now had his main title rivals out of the race. He'd maintained the lead during the first series of pit stops, and would grab the restart shortly thereafter. It was a calm restart, with the main action being between Carpentier and Dominguez, with Dominguez, who had taken P3 in the pits, getting passed by Carpentier Carpentier, then going off track in turn 8. He would keep it rolling after this, but on lap 20 he would have another incident, this time in Canada Corner where he spun into the gravel trap after a botched move on Jeff Boss. Dominguez would get beached in the gravel trap and would be out of the race. The full course caution would come out as a result. The final round of pit stops came after this, with Darren Manning moving up to 4th with a great pit stop, and Patrick Carpentier having a terrible stop, dropping down to P7. Later that lap, the race would get restarted with the top 5 consisting of Bruno Junqueira, Sebastian Bourdais, Alex Tagliani, Darren Manning, and Max Pappas. Not much was going on over the next 9 laps, with some rally action from Jeff Boss being the only real point of action. But by lap 32, the fight between Manning, Pappas, and Carpentier was hot, as Pappas went for the move on Manning into turn 3. Up towards the front, meanwhile, it was Newman Haas putting on a clinic, as after leading 34 laps on the day, Bruno Junqueira would take the victory at the 2003 Mario Andretti Grand Prix at Road America, grabbing his first win of the 2003 Champ Car season as a result and taking the championship lead in the process. Sebastian Bourdais would come home in 2nd, and Alex Tagliani would round off your podium in 3rd. Max Pappas would come home in a brilliant 4th, while the battle with Carpentier and Manning would end in a final stretch move for Carpentier to move up into P5. I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, the race itself wasn't that good, but it was short, so I can't be too upset. My main reason for confusion came from the broadcast. I've talked at length about the Speed Channel and CBS races, and how frustrating they are to watch, but this race on HDNet was disjointed, confusing, off, weird, and just a lot of synonyms. Stephen Cox, who at the time worked for Speed, was the lead commentator, and he sounded about as confused and disinterested as you could possibly get all throughout the broadcast. Jeremy Scholl was with him in the commentary booth, and as a guy who used to commentate IndyCar races for Eurosport, he at least sounded like he knew what he was talking about. And finally, we had pit reporter Guy Hobbs, who seemed like he talked more than the commentators. They threw it down to him a lot during the race, probably about 20 times in 34 laps. They also had 2 whole laps they did with the mics off, which is confusing too. In the many broadcasts I've done, one of them being 4.5 hours long, I've only done 1 ambient lap on a broadcast, and it was an hour-long broadcast that I commentated all on my own. So the fact they cut to 2 of those in the exact same time period is pretty weird to me. The whole broadcast, from what was being said to what was being shown to the poor quality, makes it feel just so bizarre. I'd recommend watching this broadcast not to see the racing, but just to feel the uncanny weirdness of it all. Next up is Mid-Ohio, and I hope you can all join me there. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. I tested positive for COVID on Sunday, so if I sound jacked up, that's because my throat is swollen like an overinflated weather balloon. The 13th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place at the only track from this season that I've actually visited in real life, Mid-Ohio. Heading into this race, the storyline worth following was a continuing championship fight. Bruno Junqueira was now in the championship lead, albeit by just 1 point. The momentum swing was strong, but throughout the weekend heading into the race it looked like it had swung again, as while Paul Tracy would start this race from a pole position, Junqueira would line up for this race in 6th. The standout star in qualifying would be rookie Ryan Monterrey, who would put his American Team Spirit car on the front row, losing out on the pole by just 16 thousandths of a second. Monterrey was confident in what the race could net, saying multiple times after qualifying that Tracy had everything to lose, while he had everything to gain. Walter Salas would be your 19th and last place starter. With all of that taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. The green flag would fly with some rally action in the top 5 and a good start from Tracy. It was PT holding on to the lead and beginning to pull away. Meanwhile, farther behind it was a rough start for Adrian Fernandez, who'd go for some lawn mowing exiting turn 5. There's room for a joke there, but I'm gonna keep my mouth shut. It was a calm start, with the only points of action after this being the balloons let go at the start lingering around the track and Tiago Monteiro getting a puncture after contact from Mario Haberfeld. But besides those two, the race was pretty boring at this early stage. However, the action would flare up on lap 10, as an incident for Roberto Moreno would take the Brazilian out of the race with rear wing and suspension damage. With his car stranded on the side of the road, the yellow would come out. After a brief yellow, the race would be restarted, but this didn't last long. Heading into the keyhole, Oriol Servio was trying to get a move done down the inside of Bruno Junqueira, but it was way too much of a dive bomb, as the two then made contact, sending the both of them into the gravel trap. Both cars would be plucked out of the runoff area and returned to the pits, with Junqueira's damage being repaired by his crew, and Oriol Servio retiring with a broken steering arm. Junqueira was now on the back foot, massively on the back foot. He was now 2 laps down, hopelessly out of contention. The race would be restarted on lap 18, and a short while later the pit stops came. While Tracy would get out ahead, it was pretty close between Michel Jourdain Jr. and Ryan Monterrey, with Michelle moving into P2. Because of that series of pit stops, Adrian Fernandez, who had pitted during the first yellow, was now in the lead, holding it for 13 laps before pulling in. Fernandez exited the pits in 4th, but soon began to fall back. After a spin for Jeff Boss, things cooled off once more. However, it being Dale Coyne this year, the boring stretch of this race will come to an end after another Dale Coyne incident, this one involving Walter Salas. But despite the car being stopped in a part of the grass where it could still be hit, the full course yellow didn't come out. It was still enough of a spook to drag the field into the pits, where Patrick Carpentier would move into net P2. Now it was Thiago Monteiro in the lead, however it wasn't very long before he came in too, giving the lead back to Tracy. Many boring laps later, the last round of pit stops came around, with Tracy exiting with the lead again, and Sebastian Bourdais nearly taking his fuel hose onto the track. A short while later was Mario Dominguez running out of gas and coming to a halt before turn 4. Surprisingly, considering the positioning of the car, the green flag remained as he was stopped on track and later towed away. Things once again died off, as Speed took inspiration from America's Funniest Home Videos and showed this clip during the broadcast. But just a few moments later, the race would get a shot in the arm. Jimmy Vasser lost it all by his lonesome heading into turn 9, spinning wildly off track and hitting the wall. Vasser was running 4th at the time and was having a fantastic showing, but unfortunately for he and the American Team Speed Johansson team, they'd leave Mid-Ohio with another DNF. The third full course yellow would come out as a result. With 5 laps to go, the green flag was back out with Tracy Carpentier and Ron Hunter-Reay running in the top 3. Considering the championship scenario, hoping for a heart-pumping battle for the lead was overly opportunistic. After leading 69 nice laps on the day, Paul Tracy would score the victory at the 2003 Champ Car Grand Prix of Mid-Ohio, scoring his 6th win on the year and retaking the championship lead. Patrick Carpentier would bring it home in 2nd to get Players Forsyth's first ever 1-2, while Ryan Hunter-Reay would come home in 3rd, taking his first ever IndyCar podium. Bruno Junqueira would finish down in 13th, only ahead of Jeff Boss. I'm not sure if it's the fact that I was so sick writing this video that afterwards I slept for 12 hours or just the way this race was, but that was pretty boring. The worst part is that there's pretty much nothing else to say other than the race not being too entertaining, so I'll end it on that. We're coming back to Canada for the next race, and I hope to see you for that race review in 1 week's time. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The 14th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in Diet, France, Quebec, Canada. We're racing in Montreal to be more precise, at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Heading into the race, the big storyline was the most exciting qualifying session of the year. It was Montreal native Alex Agliani taking a shock pole position, with another shock front row sitter of Oriol Servia starting alongside. Meanwhile, for 3rd place starter Bruno Junqueira, it was a rocky weekend. He had some more scuffles with Oriol Servia throughout the weekend, compounding what happened in Mid-Ohio. As for his relationship with the pole, I feel the need to draw attention to this. Now, I'm fairly well versed on racing driver excuses. I've been watching racing for over 14 years now. I was a driver myself for a decade, and I've been covering racing in a more in-depth manner for years as well. I know a bad racing driver's excuse when I see one, and what you're about to hear is the worst I've ever heard. And keep in mind, this is coming from a man who once said 6 years ago that the reason he was struggling for speed on an electric go-kart track was because of a misfire. After qualifying, Bruno Junqueira said that the reason he missed out on the pole was because the track changed the location of the porta potties overnight, meaning he couldn't locate them before the start of the session, couldn't relieve himself, and was thus heavier. I know I'm meant to keep the element of surprise going, but this is why Bruno Junqueira is not an IndyCar champion. Paul Tracy would start in a very disappointing 8th, having battled a very unstable car all weekend. Jeff Boss would be your 19th and last place starter, being the only driver whose best qualifying time was north of the 1:22 barrier. One big problem was made apparent before the start, and that would be fuel. And this was meant to not be an issue all year long thanks to the mandated pit windows. However, this weekend a pit stop was mandated every 20 laps, but the whole field was struggling to get that far. Because of this, fuel saving would be a big part of the race. The one part of racing strategy that people don't like is the only one to rear its head this season. God damn it. With all of that taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. The green flag would fly, and with a good start, it was Alex Agliani staying ahead of Oriol Servia and taking the early lead. Meanwhile, the comms crew was silent for some reason. Seriously, they didn't say anything until the turn 8-9 chicane on the back end of the track. I'm not sure if they had some kind of technical issue or what, but they were just silent. Darren Manning, meanwhile, certainly wasn't very silent as he got hit by Mario Dominguez. There was some more sound-related dramas. In the early stage, the only action was a collective sound of people banging their heads on the closest wall. The whole field was saving fuel, and it was pretty painful to watch. But thankfully, the fuel wouldn't be an issue for much longer. Ryan Hunter-Reay was stopped in the hairpin, and the yellow had to come out to retrieve the car. Thanks to this, the field's worry of making it to the first pit window were wiped away. There were even some pit stops farther towards the back. back. But after I received a phone call while writing this part of the video, I couldn't remember anything of note from those pit stops. The race would be restarted, and while Bruno Junqueira spun out third position and Mario Dominguez tried a kamikaze mission on Sebastian Bourdais, the field was setting up for the first pit stops. First it was Alex Tagliani coming in, followed a lap later by everyone else. Despite the early stop being played off as a detriment, it worked for Tagliani as he would rejoin with the lead and not lose that to Oriol Servia. Roberto Moreno and Adrian Fernandez, who had pitted during the Ryan Hunter-Ray yellow, were up towards the front, slotting into second and third as Servia dropped back. Servia was really struggling, losing fourth to Michel Jourdain Jr. After that, this race started to feel like it had turned into Groundhog Day, as Mario Dominguez and Sebastian Bourdais nearly killed themselves again at the chicane. Shortly after that, Bourdais got word that he needed to let Dominguez by after a pit road infraction. Then right after he let Mario by, he began complaining of gearbox issues. Sebastian would pit at the end of the lap and then retire from the race. Around the same time, we nearly had a Forsythe aside at the hairpin, as Tracy overcooked it badly and nearly rear-ended his teammate. We got a bit of TMZ after this too, as Speed Channel focused on Mika Salo in the PK Racing pits, and also mentioned how he had not only tested for the team, but had his name on the side of the car when it arrived in Montreal. Now, I'm not saying anything other than that, but what I am saying is stay tuned for next week. As the next series of pit stops neared, Alex Tagliani was really struggling. He just couldn't save fuel, so once again he'd have to pit early, coming in on lap 38. The rest of the front field responded 2 laps later, and while the pit stops were the same time, it was very close between Tagliani and Jourdain, with Tags retaining the lead just barely over his adversary. Things were getting weird. The threesome at the hairpin between Fernandez, Moreno, and Dominguez was good enough proof of that. But as things got weird, they also got miserable for Bruno Junqueira. He was once again around in the hairpin, but this time he stalled it too. With the Brazilian's car stationary, the yellow was back out. The restart came on lap 49, and besides Jeff Boss getting his metaphorical doors blown off, it was clean, briefly. Tiago Monteiro, who already had a black flag, came barreling into the hairpin with his rears locked up, going way too quickly, cleaning out Ryan Hunter-Ray and breaking his left front suspension. The yellow was back out. These yellows were helping Alex Tagliani on fuel, but he still needed to pull a big gap. The gap he was looking for was about 6 seconds, and he only had 6 laps to pull it off. Unfortunately for Tagliani, he just couldn't pull away. The gap was lingering around 1.5 seconds when he pulled into the box at the end of lap 58. He came in, and now it was Jourdain in the lead for 2 laps before he came in as well. When Jourdain pulled in, it gave the lead to Roberto Moreno, but the attention was on the battle with Michel and Tags. Jourdain's stop was well quicker, and he rejoined the track with a net lead of the race. After this, Tagliani was buried mentally, and the mistakes began to pile up. Roberto Moreno would pull in for a stop with 9 laps to go, giving the lead back to Jourdain. After leading just 15 laps on the day, Michel Jourdain Jr. would cross the line to score the victory at the 2003 Molson Indy Montreal, taking his second win on the season and his career. Oriol Servia would come home in a distant second, with Patrick Carpentier in a mightily close third. Paul Tracy, who was running fourth, would run out of fuel in the dying breaths of the race, getting passed by Alex Tagliani and Mario Dominguez to just barely squeak across the finish line in 6th. While it wasn't a good day for him, it was worse for Bruno Junqueira, who for the second race in a row would come home in 13th. I'll be brutally honest and say that coming into this race, I was expecting it to be bad, but that was one of the best races of the season. It's the best road course race of the year for sure. We'll see if it can be one-upped in the final stretch of the season. Next up is Denver, a pretty special video that I've been looking forward to, and I hope to see you all for that video in 1 week's time. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon.
What's the matter with weed?
The 15th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the original Stonerland, as the Champ Car series went
To Colorado!
There's some interesting storylines heading into the race, one of them being the incredibly hectic weekend so far. Crashes and incidents riddled the practice sessions, while rain affected Saturday qualifying. Both a great time on Friday would be last year's Denver winner Bruno Junqueira taking the pole position. After finishing 13th in the past 2 races, Bruno desperately needed to get a good result. It certainly helps his case that Paul Tracy was having a rough weekend up to this point. He was on track to take the pole but spun on his qualifying lap, relegating him down to a 9th place start. Weather was also a talking point as well, with on and off rain tinkling the weekend, the rain threat continuing for the race, and heavily overcast skies before the start. There was also the TMZ story that I promised in the Montreal video last week. PK Racing now had their 4th driver this season. The departure of Max Papis, which seemed to be on the horizon after his car didn't even have his name on it in Montreal, had now come just 2 days after the race. Max Papis was now out at PK Racing, and fellow former F1 driver Mika Salo was now in the seat for the remainder of the season. Joining Bruno Junqueira on the front row would be Oriol Servia. Jeff Boss would be your 19th and last place starter. Before we get into the race, allow me if you would to play a clip of former member of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band Jimmy Ibbotson playing possibly the worst rendition of the national anthem I've ever heard in the 19 years I've been on this planet.
dawn's early light. What so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright star through the perilous fight.
With that ear-shattering experience out of the way, we can get to the start of the race. After the jump start of the century for Montreal, Serbia, the first attempt at a start will be waved off. At least the race officials finally learned their lesson not to wave the green flag with a jump start. It took them long enough. Take 2 this time around, and for some reason Serbia didn't let Junqueira back by, the field didn't line up, and the second attempt was waved off. But on take 3, the field finally got their act together. The green flag would fly, and with an even keel start, it was Bruno Junqueira taking the lead, and Paul Tracy making up some places. But while that was going on, there's some drama farther in the back, as Rodolfo Levin was in the barriers in turn 5. Levin was a wrecking ball to both Hernandez competition drivers, as he went for a kamikaze dive on Mario Dominguez, then slammed into Roberto Moreno. Levin would be out of the race, and the yellow was back out. After the car was retrieved, the race would be restarted on lap 7, with the only action being the Forsyth duo of Carpentier and Tracy clawing for position. Up towards the front, Junqueira was slowly pulling away from Serbia. But besides that, this race was so boring that I was beginning to wish that my COVID fever hallucinations would come back. The first series of pit stops came on lap 32, and with an excellent stop, Oriol Servio would take the lead from Bruno Junqueira. It was obvious that Servio short-filled, but at a track where passing is about as tricky as picking up a lubed-up 10-pound block of iron with chopsticks, it wasn't a bad strategy. Around the same time, Walter Salas ground to a halt on track with gearbox issues. I believe that's the first time we've mentioned him in the series since mid-Ohio, and I also believe it will be the last time we mention him in the series until 2024. The safety crews would get his car out of the way in due time, avoiding a yellow. And now, a message from our sponsor.
Welcome back to Denver, where the grassroots movement is afoot to elect Thomas Kendallschlong governor of California. Now, what about this equal time issue, Thomas?
Well, as you know, when you're a candidate, all the candidates are promised equal time, which would mean, with My Time on Speed Channel, it'd be like 5 hours a week for all the other guys. But it might have been a blessing to not get our paperwork in on time, because what we're going to do is we're not officially in the race. We're going to get our word and our ideas out there. I talked to Bill Clinton. He says what's most important is get out there and press the flesh. So I've been out there this weekend doing that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to do a recall on the recall, kind of a reach around sort of move to try to bring this full circle.
I like your choices of flesh to press.
Well, I mean, it worked for Bill.
Yeah. At least you don't have to tell the truth. Oh no, you're Thomas Kendallschlong.
New ideas rooted in love.
Just about nothing happened until lap 60 when Patrick Carpentier crashed in turn 1, brought the yellow out, and sent the field into the pits. Unlike the last round of stops where Servio short-filled and gained spots, he had a long stop this time around and it dropped him to 3rd, giving Junqueira the lead again. Meanwhile, there was a scuffle with Jimmy Vasser and Paul Tracy, as Vasser was exiting his box right as Tracy entered his, resulting in Vasser stalling and Tracy hitting one of his pit guys. The race would be restarted on lap 65, and the attention was on Tracy, who made a mistake and fell back. Shortly after this, all hell began to break loose. Mario Dominguez went for a dive on Mario Haberfeld, giving Haberfeld a puncture and spinning Dominguez around. In trying to get spun in the right direction, Dominguez nearly hit Michel Drenane Jr. Dominguez was stealing the show at this stage, going for an unsuccessful yet still exciting to watch dive on Darren Manning. On lap 78, the mild chaos continued as Roberto Moreno hit the wall. As a crews recovered his car and a guy fell out of the tow truck, the field came down pit road. It was a good stop for Junqueira, who maintained the lead, a great stop for Tracy, who jumped to 4th, and a terrible stop for Ryan Hunter-Reay, who pulled away with the fuel hose attached, breaking the fuel hose and starting a pit fire. Mika Salo, meanwhile, had a terrible outlap, as not only did he go over the white line on pit exit, but he crashed shortly afterward. Ryan Hunter-Reay would be out of the race while Mika Salo would get back rolling. The restart came on lap 85, with the chaos continuing in the back. The new scuffle was between Tiago Monteiro and Mika Salo, with the both of them damaging their suspension and taking themselves out of the race. Outside of this incident, the final stages were just as boring as the rest. After leading 76 laps on the day, Bruno Junqueira would cross the line to win the 2003 Grand Prix of Denver, closing to within 18 points of Tracy. Sebastian Bourdais would finish in 2nd, completing a Newman Haas 1-2, while Oriol Servio would complete the podium in 3rd. Paul Tracy would finish in 4th. Jeff Boss would come home in 11th to be the last of the drivers to take the checkered flag, doing so 5 laps down. I've probably said this 18 million times in the series already, but that race wasn't good. One realization that I did make while writing this video is that outside of St. Pete, Brands Hatch, Lausitz, Lausitz, and maybe Montreal, I doubt I would have covered any races from this season if it weren't for this series. Also, I mentioned how I was looking forward to this video. Well, that's because this video is being released on December 20th, my 19th birthday. I remember being excited when I turned 10 because someone once told me I was allowed to swear when I hit double digits, but now I'm an adult and 366 days away from my 20s, so thank you all for watching and have a great afternoon. You thought I was gonna say fuck there, didn't you? The 16th round of the 2003 Champ Car Series season took place in a city which is so far different than the rest of Florida you have to wonder why they haven't seceded. Miami. Racing in Bayfront Park for only the second time, the race was destined to be a difficult one. Temperatures come race day were in the 90s, with humidity making the cockpits feel like carbon fiber saunas. The heat was certainly getting to championship leader Paul Tracy, who had a dreadful weekend up to this point. In Friday practice in the rain, Tracy hit the wall. Then on day 1 of qualifying, Tracy pitted a lap too early, voiding his chances and improving his time. Then in day 2 of qualifying, Tracy had already set the fastest lap but was tracking 0.4 of a second quicker before a spin in the final corner, destroying his chances at taking the pole. Tracy certainly wasn't very short on words in his interview with Calvin Fish afterwards.
Paul, shades of Denver there, mate. This single car qualifying. Tell us what happened there.
I'm fucking furious with myself. I just can't even believe, I mean, last lap, last corner, lost it again, so just really pissed off.
Now mind you, Bruno Junqueira was not having a great weekend either, as he too crashed in that rainy Friday practice, along with having a hard crash in Saturday qualifying. However, Bruno would still start on the front row after setting the fastest lap time on Friday qualifying. Tracy, meanwhile, would start down in 5th. The issues for the front runners in the championship opened the door for Adrian Fernandez to grab a shock pole position, his first of the season. Alex Barafico, subbing in for Walter Salas like he did in Toronto, would be your 19th and last place starter. His qualifying time was a 48.871, which was a shocking 4.6 seconds off of the pole time. If Champ Car had a 107% rule like Formula 1 does, he wouldn't have made the race. Outside the main championship fight, the Rookie of the Year fight was looking to be closed off, as Sebastian Bourdais had a chance to seal the deal with 3 races left in the season. We were so preoccupied by everything going on this weekend that I didn't even mention how the track layout had changed from the year prior. It still doesn't make much of a difference with this glorified go-kart track, however it should be noted regardless. With everything taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. The green flag would fly with a good start as Bruno Junqueira taking the lead, and everyone else getting through lap 1 clean. But Adrian Fernandez wasn't done just yet, as heading into turn 1 at the start of the next lap, Fernandez went for a really audacious move to retake the lead. As that was going on, Tracy clawed his way past Bourdais to move into 4th. Bourdais had warned Tracy before the start of the race that if he went for a move like he did in Montreal, he would slam the door shut and take them both out of the race. Keep that quote in mind, it'll come into play later. The race at this stage was really a fight to stay alive and out of the barriers, as everyone began to drive line astern, save fuel, and whittle the laps away. It certainly doesn't help that there was only one real overtaking opportunity on this whole track, with even that being sketchy. Patrick Carpentier was certainly proving that as he was stuck behind Rodolfo Levin, and soon fell into the crutches of Adrian Fernandez to be lapped. But even Fernandez couldn't get by, forming a massive line of about 8 cars. Eventually, Rodolfo Levin would be given a black flag for blocking, ending that schmozzle. Fernandez was hoping at this stage of the race to begin to pull away, but a spin install for Jeff Boss in turn 1 was not what he had in mind, as the first yellow of the race came out with it. The first series of pit stops came with it, where the order of the top 6 remained unchanged. CBS, meanwhile, was dwelling on a wheel taken off of Sebastian Bourdais' car, completely ignoring the restart where Oriol Servia lost it going over the turn 12 bump and slammed into the wall. As Servia's wrecked race car was towed off the track, CBS cut to an interview with Joe Barbieri from Bridgestone. That series of events just about summarizes how the Champ Car broadcasts were this season. The yellow was long, about 9 laps to be precise, but on lap 52 the race was finally restarted with the top 6 consisting of Adrian Fernandez, Bruno Junqueira, Paul Tracy, Sebastian Bourdais, Michel Jourdain Jr., and Mario Dominguez. Yet again, the race was settling into a groove, with the race seeming more like a parade. However, one driver that wasn't taking it easy was Rodolfo Levin, who broke his left rear suspension in a crash in turn 9 and took himself out of the race. But shortly after this, things began to heat up towards the front, as Paul Tracy lost the top element off his front wing, and lap traffic began to get involved. Tracy was losing time, and quickly fell into the crutches of Sebastian Bourdais. Sebastian went for the move going into turn 1 on lap 68. Tracy countered trying to go for the switchback into turn 2, but the move was never on. Tracy hit Bourdais' left rear, breaking PT's front wing, bending his right front wishbone and taking him out of the race. Bourdais meanwhile was sent to the barriers, losing his rear wings, stalling and bringing the yellow out. Bourdais would get his car refired and bring it back to the pits, but he was out of the race as well. This incident really was a first shot across the bow of the fiery rivalry between the two of them. Despite his teammate being involved, this incident was a dream scenario for Bruno Junqueira. All he needed to do now was hold on to his P2 spot to close the championship gap to just 1 point, or win the race and grab the championship lead. But there was still a long way to go between lap 72 and the finish on lap 135. When the race was restarted, the attention shifted to the encroaching final round of pit stops. After pitting about 10 laps earlier than expected the first time around, most of the field was looking to pit around lap 90. Another story at this stage was the fact that the heat was becoming a real issue, with Mika Salo complaining of severe fatigue, and Ryan Hunter-Reay telling his team that the rubber grips on his steering wheel were starting to come off. At the end of lap 90, the front runners came into the pits, and while Fernandez exited with the lead, Jourdain made contact with Thiago Monteiro, although both escaped without damage. It was mightily close between Fernandez and Junqueira, and they were still close when they caught up to the very slow lapped car of Thiago Monteiro. But this ended in disaster as Fernandez hit the brakes very early and Junqueira had to check up to avoid hitting him, spinning into Monteiro and Fernandez in the process. All three of them would be stopped on the side of the road and stalled, and the yellow was once again back out. All of this chaos would give the lead to Mika Salo. However, he was off sequence and had to pit. So for the lap 100 restart, the top three was Jourdain, Darren Manning, and Mario Dominguez. But this restart was complete chaos. There was hard battling with Mario Dominguez and Jimmy Vasser that resulted in contact, allowing Mika Salo to buzz by the both of them. Then another incident took place involving Alex Tagliani and Alex Sparafico, which took the both of them out of the race. Sparafico was stalled on track with a busted side pod and a broken radiator, and Alex Tagliani was puttering around the track with broken suspension. As a result, the yellow was back out. During this yellow, a controversial and vital decision was made. Jourdain was given a penalty for the pit road incident with Monteiro. The penalty itself was to send him to the tail end of the field for the next restart. As such, it was now Darren Manning in the lead for the next restart. However, he quickly began to fall back after Mario Dominguez got by him. It was now a Herdez competition 1-2 with less than 30 laps to go. In the team's entire history, even back when they were called Benhausen Racing, they had never had both cars finish in the top 10, but were now on the cruise to finish 1-2. But the hopes for a smooth finish were dashed after Ryan Hunter-Reay crashed on lap 114, bringing the yellow out. During the yellow, Darren Manning came in for his long-awaited final stop, but as the team dropped him off the jacks, he grenaded his gearbox. Manning was now without third gear, but despite that, the team still kept him out on track. With 13 laps left to go, the race was back underway, and outside of Darren Manning crawling around the track, spawning a decent battle between himself and Jeff Boss, all of the drivers who at this point were exhausted were just trying to get to the finish. Outside of Darren Manning retiring from the race, ending an 8-race streak of top 10 finishes, the later stages of the race were surprisingly calm. After leading 28 laps on the day, Mario Dominguez would score the victory at the 2003 Grand Prix Americas, his second victory in his Champ Car career, but this time a win that he earned. His teammate Roberto Moreno would finish in second to complete the Herdez 1-2, while Mika Salo in only his second start would grab a podium finish in third. Bruno Junqueira, in a race where he could have taken the championship lead, would finish in ninth, scoring just 5 points. The gap was now 13 points between he and Paul Tracy with 3 races left in the season. I'm 99% sure this is the first time I've said this so far this series, but that was one hell of a race. I mean, granted, passing was basically impossible at this track, which spoiler alert explains why the race was never on again, but that was one hell of a send-off for a pretty forgotten track. I can't say for sure recording this voiceover, but with this script being at about 2,000 words, it's by a comfortable margin the longest installment of the series so far, and the longest race review I've ever done, period, outside the Final Nail in the Coffin documentary, but we don't really count that. It's a fairly unexpected race too. I was expecting this race to be boring as all hell, but I was proved wrong, and I'm glad I was. Really, the worst part of making this video was recording the voiceover, which I've been doing for the past 5 hours. I should clarify I didn't have anything to drink last night, just for some reason my face isn't moving as it usually should.
Correction, it was the editing. It is 8:36 a.m. on the day that this is being released. I stayed up until 1 o'clock editing this, and I am still editing it. The point in the video that you're seeing this clip is the point that I'm at now. I just wanted to show off my generally disheveled look. I look like a depressed art teacher.
This was one hell of a race to have as my last race review of 2023, and fingers crossed you all agree. Next up on the calendar is Mexico City, and I hope to see you all for that race review in 2024. Outside of a special announcement video on Friday and a short I have coming out on Sunday, this is the last video of the year, so I'd like to close this off by thanking all of you for the incredible year on this channel. I came into 2023 with about 600 subscribers, hoping to break 1,000, maybe 1,500 if I was lucky. We're now north of 3,000, which is pretty hard to wrap my head around. It's really meant the world to me, so thank you all for your support. Talking about racing has always been what I like doing. I've been doing it online in some capacity since I was 11, running a blogspot account in my spare time. It's now my career. I'd like to thank all of you for making it possible. Even with some stumbles along the way, catching COVID, the root canal, and my PC blowing up being at the top of that list, this year has really been the best of my life so far. And here's to the hope that 2024 will be even better. Thank you all for watching, have a very happy new year, and a great afternoon. The 17th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in a country that used footage of drug addicts 5 miles away from my house and an anti-drug PSA, Mexico. Specifically, the Champ Cars were running at Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. Much like last week where there was a lot of storylines to touch on before the start, we have a lot to cover again, this time with some driver shuffles. Before finishing second in Miami, it was already announced that Roberto Moreno would not be driving in Mexico City, with the seat being given to Roberto Gonzalez. Gonzalez had actually already raced this season at the season opener in St. Pete. A fact you may not know even after watching this whole series because I misspoke and called him Walter Salas when I made that St. Pete video back in July. In my defense, I recorded that voiceover in a blind panic about a half an hour before a broadcast and 15 hours before I had to catch a train to go to Baltimore. There's another new driver this weekend, however one that wasn't replacing anybody. Luis Diaz was entered in a third Walker racing car, meaning for the first time this season we had more than 19 cars. Older fans of this channel may remember Diaz from a video I made about his Champ Car career back in the summer of 2022. The fact that video is coming up on 2 years old truly is terrifying. In terms of the on-track stories, the biggest was a championship fight. Paul Tracy was in the lead, 14 points ahead of Junqueira. It was looking good for PT, as he would take the pole position for this race. The Newman Haas duo of Bruno Junqueira and Sebastian Bourdais would occupy the second row. Joining Tracy on the front row would be Thiago Montero, piloting a Reynard which were surprisingly quick this weekend. Even still, that is a very impressive performance, especially one coming from a driver who has had a truly awful season to this point. Jeff Boss would be your 20th and last place starter. With a very abridged pre-race show on the broadcast, and a rambling one on this video, we can get to the start of the race. Well, scrap that because basically nobody got lined up and the start was waved off. It's gonna be one of those days, isn't it? Well, take two this time around, we'd actually grab the green. The green flag would fly, and with a fantastic start, it was Bruno Junqueira giving an unsuccessful challenge to Paul Tracy. Meanwhile, farther behind, all hell broke loose with multiple cars spinning and hitting each other, and Adrian Fernandez going for some rally action through the gravel. One of the cars involved was Michel Jourdain Jr., who is now on the back foot if he wants to stay in the championship fight. Speed Channel would then miss the ensuing restart on lap 4. I guess if people running the broadcast just thought, well, that's for our commercial break anyways. Sure, there's no cars to recover and the green flag will probably be out by the time we come back, but we gotta make our money somehow. Don't ask me how I pulled a Marvin the Martian voice out of my ass. I don't know either. We're 17 episodes in, folks. I think this series has officially made me insane. Getting back to the restart, Paul Tracy started gapping the field almost immediately. The action was towards the back of this stage, as Adrian Fernandez went for a kamikaze move on Walter Salas, locking up and sending the both of them off the track. Jeff Boss behind them saw this and got spooked into taking the turn 1 runoff area, but in trying to get turned around, he stalled it. After multiple laps of the safety crews trying to get him refired, they eventually just gave up and pulled him behind the wall. The race at this stage was really boring, so allow me, if you would, to draw your attention to Sebastian Bourdais' car. You may notice that's a really ugly green. Well, this weekend he was sponsored by, as what the broadcast called it, an Eli Lilly medication yet to be approved in America. It was Cialis, which for those in my audience who aren't aware, is erectile dysfunction medication. I don't have anything else to say about that. I just saw this as an excuse to say erectile dysfunction in a video. Actually, no, as I wrote that part of the video, they described the color as frog green, which now makes me think Cialis should have used this marketing slogan for the weekend. Cialis. Care to have a frog in your throat? I am such a child. Around lap 12, the great run that Luis Diaz was having ended in similar fashion to his race here last year, as his engine blew up and he was forced to pull off the track. If he were sponsored by Cialis, I'd say he pulled out. It's at times like these where I wonder why 3,000 people decide to subscribe to me. On lap 19, the pit stops came, and it was pretty close between the two new and Haas cars, with Bourdais and his team working hard to try and extend in front of his teammate. Even though Juncker was in the championship fight, Bourdais was in a fight of his own to get the Rookie of the Year award. Considering his sponsor and the fact he had a great chance to lock it up this weekend, a fitting celebration would be erecting a statue. The troubles for Walker Racing continued, as Rodolfo Levin pulled off the track with a broken gearbox. Certainly a driver not having any issues was Paul Tracy, with his gap growing to over 10 seconds. And with that, I've officially run out of things to talk about and dick jokes, so let's take a break from solely talking about the racing. I have a bit of a bone to pick about the branding around IndyCar tracks these days. In this race, you've got massive inflatable advertisements on the side of the track. Now remind me again, why do we get rid of those? Think about it, could kill two birds with one stone. Not only is it eye-catching advertisement that I think could still work today, if the race is really boring, you could cut the straps holding it down, let it float onto the track and throw the yellow. Can you tell that's what I wish would happen in this race? I can't be too upset, we had a great race last week, so it was inevitable that this race was going to be a bit boring in comparison, rule of averages and all that, but seriously, I just won more than 5 good races for the love of all that's holy. The next series of pit stops came around, with the front runners pulling in on lap 39. Because of this series of stops, Bourdais would jump ahead of his teammate. Then not too long after this, the race finally got a shot in the arm. Jimmy Vasser went for a kamikaze dive into turn 1, taking himself and Alex Tagliani out of the race. That move just about summarizes Jimmy Vasser's racing career since 1998. After a few laps under yellow, the race was back underway on lap 46, and while everyone's attention was put on Tracy and Bourdais, the real fight was between Montero and Junqueira, with Montero getting the move done. But as that was going on, there was some drama farther behind, as Darren Manning and Roberto Gonzalez hashed a mazel which brought the yellow back out. Both of them would continue on with little to no damage. The lap 49 restart was far less exciting than the last one, with the order remaining very much the same. The shuffles came as the field started the final pit sequence. One casualty came from this, as Walter Salas pulled in and retired from the race with gearbox issues. About 5 laps later was when the front runners came in. Tracy and his team got the job done to escape the pits ahead of Bourdais. Thiago Montero's team wouldn't, as he dropped back like a rock after a slow stop. All of this chaos gave the lead to Adrian Fernandez, who was off sequence and finally pitted after 6 laps spent in the lead. As that was going on, Junqueira was really struggling, falling down to 8th on pace alone, net 7th after Fernandez's pit stop. Fernandez's race soon got even worse, as after a stop he punted Oriol Servia into a spin, marking Adrian's 5th crash of the day. The spotty chaos continued, as Patrick Carpentier would run out of gas in the dying laps of the race, but for his teammate Tracy, it was a blowout. After leading 64 laps on the day, Tracy would cross the line to score the win at the 2003 Gran Premio Telmex, taking his 7th victory of the year. Sebastian Bourdais would finish in 2nd to clinch the Jim Truman Rookie of the Year award, and Mario Dominguez would finish in 3rd to score a fantastic podium, celebrating like he had won the championship. One driver that certainly wasn't feeling like a champion was Bruno Junqueira, as his 7th place run was a pitiful result to get in a race where Tracy scored nearly the maximum amount of points you could. Tracy was now in the lead of the championship by 29 points. With a maximum of 23 points available in any given weekend, Tracy now had the chance to clinch his first ever Champ Car championship at Surfers Paradise. That wasn't a good race, don't get me wrong, but it's honestly quite mid-range for this season. It could also have something to do with the fact that I only have 2 more races left to cover this season, so seeing the end being so close makes the pain hurt less. Or maybe it's the fact that this race felt like a buzz by pretty quickly. The Miami race footage is about an hour longer than this race, mainly because that was a satellite feed version of the race that had them talking during their commercial breaks, and even filming stuff at the end. This, meanwhile, was about an hour and a half. Pretty straightforward, but also a bit boring. Also, a quick little note, I'm recording this part of the voiceover at 7:27 p.m. on Sunday, December 31st, so this is officially my last voiceover from 2023. It's only interesting for myself and maybe 5 viewers, but I felt like pointing it out regardless. Next up on the calendar is Surfers Paradise, where we could see the crowning of a new champion. I hope to see you all for that video in 1 week's time. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. The 18th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in the land down under, Australia. As outlined in the Mexico City race review, the championship was the talking point coming into this weekend. Paul Tracy would be able to lock up his first ever Champ Car championship with a finish of 1st or 2nd. Bruno Junqueira, meanwhile, needed to leave this weekend with a less than 21 point gap to Tracy. Really, all Tracy needed to do is just finish ahead of Junqueira in the race and he would be your champion for 2003. Bruno knew what was at stake and was a man on a mission this weekend, coming out guns blazing and grabbing the bonus point for setting the fastest time in Friday qualifying. But the man playing spoilers was his own teammate Sebastian Bourdais, who'd grab his 5th pole position on the year on Saturday. Bruno would start alongside. Tracy, meanwhile, would start just behind them in 3rd. Michel Jourdain Jr., who was a massive long shot entering this weekend, would qualify in 9th, taking none of the qualifying bonus points and thus being mathematically eliminated from championship contention. With that, it was now a true 2-horse race. Jeff Boss would be our 19th and last place starter. Outside the championship fight, there were some other storylines, like the return of Roberto Moreno, but considering what's at stake this weekend, I doubt many of you give a rat's ass. With heavily overcast skies and a threat of rain, the stage was set for what could be a dramatic championship deciding race. With everything taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. Yet again this season we'd have a failed start, as Bruno Junqueira jumped the green by a country mile while Sebastian Bourdais was trundling around at a snail's pace. The team meddling was obvious, and Paul Tracy was a bit ticked off. Take 2 this time around and we'd actually grab the green. The green flag would fly with some Newman-Haas trickery as Bourdais laying his teammate into the lead. But heading into the first corner, there was some more Newman-Haas drama, as Sebastian Bourdais sent Paul Tracy into a spin. As the field stacked up behind, Oriol Servia was sent into the tire barriers, taking himself out of the race. The Servia incident was a big break for Tracy, as the yellow came out with it. Tracy would restart the race at the tail end of the field, but he was still on the lead lap. The race was restarted on lap 4, with Bruno Junqueira in the lead quickly pulling away. Meanwhile, farther behind, Thiago Monteiro would pull into the pits with a gearbox issue, knocking him out of the race. While all of this was going on, Paul Tracy was making his way through the field, clawing up to 13th. But the encroaching return of a pissed-off PT wasn't the scariest thing. The weather was. Rain was being reported just a few miles away, and it was becoming a matter of when, not if, as to the rain approaching the track. But despite that, the controversial start was still on people's minds. There was a steward's inquiry as to whether or not Bourdais took an unjustifiable risk with his botched move on Tracy, but didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, as around lap 12, Bourdais slammed into the wall coming out of the first chicane, smoke screening the track in the process. Considering how everyone else was slipping around at the same time, it's pretty obvious what was causing it. The rain was here, and soon enough it was absolutely pouring. The field would flood into the pits during the ensuing yellow, where Tracy would actually gain 2 positions to make his way up into the top 10. However, right after the stops is when the weather got much worse. What started off as rain soon turned into a deluge, and then turned into a hailstorm. The rain was so bad that even running behind the safety car was sketchy, so less than 15 laps into the race the red flag would come out. The red flag was an hour long, during which most of the time was spent trying to dry the track. The rain was gone after about 15 minutes. The rest of it just saw course workers sweeping waves of water into drains, and pit crew members squeegeeing their pit boxes. It was still an hour-long hold on the race, which would result in the race distance being shortened from the planned 65 laps to only 47. After quite some time, the cars were refired, and soon enough the field was ready to retake the green in the rain. On lap 17, the race was restarted, but almost immediately the yellow returned after a spin and stall for Mika Salo in the final corner. Paul Tracy managed to pick off 2 cars in the process, passing both Salo and Darren Manning, who had to check up to avoid hitting a fin. After Salo was restarted, the race was back underway again, but all hell broke loose right after the restart. Roberto Moreno lost it trying to pass Alex Tagliani, spinning the both of them around. In trying to get spun around in the right direction, Tagliani would run into Paul Tracy. Paul was now pinned between Alex Tagliani and Darren Manning, and he tried to break free, but in doing so he hit Tagliani's stopped car with his right rear, breaking his suspension. Despite the damage being pretty significant on Paul's car, the team would still attempt to repair it. Walter Salas also spun during all of that, but I doubt that even Dale Coyne Racing cared about it, much less everyone else. The next restart came around on lap 22, and while Mario Haberfeld spun around in the final corner, Rodolfo Levin and Mika Salo made contact, giving Levin a puncture and Salo a broken front wing. Thankfully for all of us, the race started to settle down a little bit. That, I think, is the first time that's been said in this entire series. Around the halfway mark, there's still plenty of things to touch on, though. Tracy was back in the race, but was 3 laps down. Junqueira, meanwhile, was still comfortably at the front and soon clinched the bonus point for leading the most amount of laps. Not to mention the final round of pit stops was quickly approaching, the sun was back, and a dry line was beginning to form. A lot of things were set to change in the second half of this race. Even despite Bruno Junqueira dropping down to 3rd after Michel Jourdain Jr. and Adrian Fernandez overtook him, it was still looking good for Bruno. However, the complexion of the race changed not very long after this, as Alex Tagliani spun and stalled while Mario Haberfeld was stopped on track. The 6th yellow of the race was out, and with the pit window closing in just 5 laps, most of the field came into the pits during this. I say most, the American Team Spirit Johansson team stayed out, meaning Ryan Hunter-Reay and Jimmy Vasser were now 1-2. It was a gamble to be sure, as their tires were a few laps older, but it's not a bad gamble considering how the race has gone thus far. The chaos we've come to expect from the restart seemed to come early this time, as before the race was even restarted, Mario Dominguez lost his right rear tire going down the back straightaway. But once the errant tire was retrieved, the race was set to be restarted with 12 laps to go on lap 36. While the American Team Spirit Johansson cars accompanied by Darren Manning start to pull away, the attention was on the rest of the field. Bruno Junqueira was under a microscope for cutting the first chicane on the restart, but much like his teammate earlier, it didn't matter. One lap after the restart, Bruno Junqueira's car was destroyed in the runoff area of the first chicane. It was a single car accident, although Mario Haberfeld was involved in a separate crash around the same time. It was just Bruno's second DNF of the year, but it hurt the most. With that crash, it all but assured the championship for Paul Tracy. Despite that, the race was far from over, and with 7 laps to go, the green flag was back out for a few moments. Adrian Fernandez was down the barriers, and the 8th full course yellow was out. After Fernandez's car was refired and the broken front wing was picked off the track, the race was set to be restarted with 4 laps to go. Ryan Hunter-Reay needed a good restart, and that's exactly what he got. As Vassar and Darren Manning began to battle in his mirrors, Hunter-Reay began to drive off into the sunset. After leading only 15 laps on the day, the first 15 in his Champ Car career, Ryan Hunter-Reay would cross the line in first to win the 2003 Lexmark Indy 300. Darren Manning would finish in a close second, with Jimmy Vassar finishing in third. Paul Tracy would finish in 13th and was officially your 2003 Champ Car Series champion. A special shout out goes to Dale Coyne Racing. Walter Salas, who brought home in 6th, and Jeff Balls, who finished in 9th, got the best results of their respective Champ Car careers. Truly a highlight weekend from Dale Coyne this season. That was one hell of a race. Very chaotic to be sure, but amazing to watch as well. A race full of storylines, good, bad, and ugly, was a shining light from the year. But the man of the day is without a doubt Paul Tracy. After over a decade racing in the top echelons of American Open Wheel, Tracy was now a Champ Car champion. And to do with a race to spare as well just about sums up his year. Tracy was overcome with emotion in the crowning moment from his best IndyCar season. And can you really blame him? As Bob Varsha said towards the end of the broadcast, Tracy's career had now come full circle. We've hit a stride towards the end of the season, and we just had one of the best races from the year. But even though we have a championship that's already locked up, I have a feeling that we still have a fantastic race knocking on our front door. Next up on the calendar to bring the season to a close is a 500-mile race in Fontana. It's been quite a long time since we had some balls-to-the-wall oval racing, so I'm really excited for what next week can bring. Oh, the Fontana race got canceled because of wildfires. Well, good night, everybody.